I'm having fun today. I really am. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting history going around and a lot of interesting discussions. I'm having fun with the amount of people who are commenting on the back catalogue at the moment because I keep getting comments coming through and flashing up and I'm going, I don't remember when I recorded that video. I recorded that video a long time ago. I'm going to have to check my script or something. And it's a case of, you know, it's, you know, what did I say? Just adding in a little response. Because a few people have been commenting going, oh yeah, you know, the Anglo-Japanese alliance. What's the effect of that? Well, you know, technically, the Japanese and the Brits do not have to join a war unless either the other one is facing multiple opponents. Interesting scenario is that any war which involves America siding in on the side of Germany, and of course the Germany and Austro-Hungary, etc., do also themselves represent multiple opponents, would automatically mean it's a multiple opponents war and would automatically trigger it. And for the Japanese, that would be lovely. Anyway, so Jack Ray, a huge factor in bringing the US into the war on the UK and French side is the amount of war death accumulated by them. Yes and no. I think that certainly means that the Americans did not want to see France and Britain broken as countries, because then they wouldn't get their money back. The odds are is. But I also have no doubt that, frankly, they didn't really... that wasn't really going to make them get involved in the war. I know Hugh Strachan's argument. I've read Hugh Strachan's argument, and I have talked with Hugh at conferences. And he is a very, very smart person, and he writes a very persuasive argument. I just don't think it stacks up quite as persuasively as he thinks, because I'm less of the inclined of the... how do I put this? I am cynical about the relationship of power and money. I am cynical about the viability of power. But I am very, very cynical about the ability of that as an argument on its own. I think it's more of a factor as that on top of that means that the classes who might oppose war on it's going to get in way of us making money grounds will not be as loud. I think it means it's more likely they get out the way than it is they are supporting war. The Germans managed to kick themselves in the foot many, many times, which is actually kind of an interesting thing, because I will explain this, as I always do with alternate history videos. I will go through this and explain, as much of this video is about how I managed to get to a point where I can foresee the US actually going to war on the side of Germany in World War One. It's kind of interesting. Hello, John Shea. Hello, nice to go from. Hello, Zaski. But hello, Paul from Chicago. Hello, Mark Agnes. Hello, Mike Gooch. Hello, Don Rick Ironhammer. Peter Dawson. Good evening. Hi, Steve Clarke. Hi, Mocha Coach. Hello, Cody85. Hello. Steve Richards, DJ40, Tanner Felica, Mikey Newman. Hello. Amelia Barrow. Hello, Cody85. Hello. Blackburn Maximus. Hello. DH89. Hello. We still didn't get our money back. No. hang on, we paid back our debts eventually. Sorry, I'm supposed to say one rather than the. Yes, I would say it's more of a supporting context than one of the reasons I would focus on, even as that level. Minus Britain and France. It would be useful if America was fully in this with us. Germany, let us help. Yeah, they were kind of like that. Matcha Dostal, the Osfunk, and Leslie Mitchell. Hello, everyone. So, World War One. Okay. This is an alternate history question from Cody. So thank you, Cody. Hello. As you can see, it's been taken over by the fluffy research assistant, as he's decided to present this particular topic. Do you want to take them off? You want to start it? No. He's very happy with me today. Because whilst there are no biscuits here, a 10-kilogram box of Bonios has arrived, hasn't it? And suddenly I am the favourite human ever. I mean, literally. 2 10-kilogram boxes of dog's biscuits arrived today. One of Bonios for him, one of the biscuits for Zebedee. And, yeah. Hello. Hello, you. Brits did, French didn't. Yeah, but in the nicest way, have you ever expected the French to pay their debts? Seriously. The models and pictures of the Titanic are nice. I'm currently having fun today. I've been having rather a little bit too much fun because I've been winding up people on Twitter and all sorts of things. Or rather, wind up people without meaning to wind people up on Twitter. If I open it up, I did what I thought was possibly the blandest tweet possible. Because I was... let's put it this way. There are some people currently raving over the Type 31 getting Mark 41 VLS. And it was all supposed to. Good. I'm not too annoyed by it. I think it's going to push the cost up, but I think it was also something it was sensible that they were planned to be fitted for rather than with, and I think it's always sensible to fit stuff with it rather than for it. But, and I will say that is then, of course, caused the usual debate to break out over, yeah, but, you know, we should have armed the River class, we should up-arm this, we should up-arm that. And so, I put out a very mild tweet. A very mild tweet, I felt. Add source. And this one. Which I'm going to explain before we get into this live discussion. Not every warship needs to be first rate. The majority in the 1700s were third rate and sixth rates. Whilst I will always argue for fitting with rather than for, it's important to arm a vessel for a role and likely missions, not to make a full shibboleth for weapon quantity or other ship suitability. Now, interesting enough, quite a lot of people took umbrage with the fact that I picked this picture. But I rather thought this was a good picture, because I picked a picture which shows battleships and aircraft carriers, or rather it shows HMS Renown, battlecruiser. It shows HMS Nelson, HMS Victorious, aircraft carrier, and, no, is it HMS Formidable? I think it's actually HMS Formidable, aircraft carrier, and HMS Duke of York, King George V class battleship. And they're all alone. And, you know, that's what people's image of naval warfare is. What's missing from that picture? What can't you see in that picture? All the escorting, cruisers, destroyers, sloops, all the vessels around them that are part of that task group. Now, In a world which has battleships, can you describe any destroyer as being a first rate? No. You can't describe any sloop as being a first rate. And that's the point, really. These days we get so obsessed with adding on weapons to our ships and making them the most powerful warship ever, that we don't ask ourselves, sometimes go, well, does it really need those weapons to do its job? Why are we adding a load of land attack cruise missiles onto this destroyer? Does it need them? If it does, great. If not, what's its purpose? Type 31 is meant to be a presence ship and flak frigate. So, I don't mind having Mark 41 VLS. If it's Mark 41 VLS, it hasn't got a radar on it for long-range air defense missiles, so it can't take those. If they could get some form of ASROC for it, I'd be very happy. Rocket-assisted torpedo system. That'd be very good for it. That would be great for a frigate doing the roles it's going to be doing in presence missions. If they feel like putting some anti-ship missiles in it, great. That'll be useful for it doing its missions. But let's be honest, unless you're deciding to quad pack in CAM, in which case you probably want to replace the 24 VLS it's going to be carrying with Sea Scepter on it, with about 8 to 16 Mark 41 VLS. So that, because if you can carry a 16 more, you can carry 64 more Sea Scepters. You've got to think these things through. If you're going to go to Mark 41 route, that's good. And it's kind of the similar story when we start talking about the current debate going on over Australia and Type 26. I see a lot of comparisons of the costing. And the comparisons often miss out one thing. You shouldn't be comparing the cost of building the Type 26 in Australia to the cost of building the Constellation class in America. You should be comparing the cost of building the Type 26 in the UK to the cost of building the Constellation class in America. That'd be fairer, because to build in Australia, it doesn't matter whether you're building the Constellation class, the Type 26, the FREM, what you're building. You're building an entire industry up from scratch, because I'm sorry, Australia, your government has mucked you up. They have kept mucking around on your shipbuilding program. The last ships you procured, the Hobarts and the Canberras, were all built abroad. Their hulls were built abroad. Their structures were built abroad. And then they did fitting out in Australia. So, if you want to do a system where you build the hulls abroad in the UK with the Type 26, that would work. And that would bring the cost down dramatically, because you wouldn't have to build a whole new yards and whole new skills up. It's the same with the Constellation class. If you want to procure them under that weight, that's great. But if you want to build the facilities in Australia, and if you want to build the ships in Australia, it's going to cost a lot more. Because it always does. So, it's those are the realities. And it's again with the Type 31. What do you want it to do? There is no point in loading a Type 31 with long-range anti-aircraft missiles. It isn't got the radars for them. That's not its job. There's no point in putting them on Type 26. It also hasn't got the radars for it. Why? Because the Royal Navy has built a Type 26, the British Type 26 in this case, because the British Type 26 is built without long-range radar. It's a frigate radar. It's got a very good system. It's a system currently being used on the Type 23s right now. It's being transferred across to the Type 26. It's very good for the frigate role, for its defence, but it's not an area defence radar system. That's what's on the Type 35s for British. Now the Australians want to fit an area air defence radar, area air defence missiles, and the full anti-submarine warfare suite into the same sized hull the British are planning on fitting just an anti-submarine warfare system. Now, I know people keep telling me, well, no, the Australian system, a ship weighs more than the British one. It does. It does weigh more. But that's because the British one has space for expansion. The Australian one is crammed full. So basically, the Australian hull is going to enter service looking like the British vessel will look like after its mid-life refit, in terms of tonnage and displacement. So when you want to upgrade the Australian vessel, you're going to have to take stuff out. And that's entirely down to the hull size they chose. The whole lesson of this is long-term decisions can have consequences. And they do have consequences for a long time. Which is the whole motto of this book, by the way. Hello, Stafford. Hello, Pimp Minter. Abzaki, what's wrong? There's nothing wrong with the Mark 41 VLS. It's a very useful VLS system. But ask yourself, why are you fitting with it? Why are you fitting it? Because also, there's no point having the VLS and not loading it with missiles. So what missiles are you going to load into it? Is the River class perfectly fine for its role then? The River class's role is they're an OPV. Their role is maritime security and presence. Yes, they have a little gun on the front. Yes, I'd like to see those guns upgraded. But do I need to turn it into a full warship? No. Because that's just going to make it more expensive to operate. A lot more expensive to operate. And the thing is, it's supposed to be my cheap presence vessel. The vessel I have going around showing the flag. It's the sloop. It's the, it's the thing you have going around showing a flag because why do you want to send the big battleship? Because that's just expensive and overkill. And I mean, guess I fall into this trap. Focus on the big ships. Don't worry, most people do. Just wrong. If you plan on building more often in Australia, then it might worth the cost of infrastructure. Exactly. If you want to continue to have a capability to build in Australia, then you're going to have to suck up the cost of infrastructure. Otherwise, it's never going to be viable to build it. And one of the things you can consider is that building the Type 26 in Australia and all the capabilities that's going to do is, whilst it's not the same skills as are needed for the nuclear submarine program, it's going to give you a lot better base and maritime industrial base to draw from to build up the nuclear program, which is going to make that more viable in turn. History Vanguard, congratulations. Enjoy your A-levels. I'm sure you do spectacularly. Mark Harness. Actually, at least our excuse for overcrowding our ships was an awareness they'd either win or die, as is. Yeah. As I know why the Polish Type 31s are fitted with those, because we have no other ships and we need them to be really more pro. True. And that's fine. That is really sensible. And that's the great thing about a platform like the Arrowhead 140, which the Type 31 is developed from. And which is, of course, developed from the Danish frigates, the Overhoodfelt class. It's a wonderful design. It's a very general, a very capable design. And that's the good thing about it. It's adaptable. But let's remember why we're procuring these ships and what they're going to do. And what they're for. And what we need them for. They're going to be Britain's forward presence ships and they're going to be Britain's flag frigates. So if they're going to be doing those two roles, close protection of the task group, then what they need for their VLS is basically a point defense sand farm. Okay, that's fine. Having that's great, in which case why do we have two types of VLS for that? Don't need it. Have one or the other. Sorry. I'm getting mildly gassed out, so I'm going to let someone in the garden. Oh, good God. Oh. Good God. And the other role is, okay, they're going to be a global presence ship. So in which case, one of the things, if they do have Talons on them, great. If they do have land attack missiles, great, that they have flexibility. And it goes, but it's also going to raise their status a bit. And suddenly they're an even bigger they're a far bigger threat than they were coming in. And one of the points I've made constantly about naval diplomacy is you want to have a graduated capability. And the thing is, the base level capability of turning up is a river class turns up. The next level above that is the Type 31, theoretically, which will be forward deployed an area ship to wander around. Next level above that is a Type 26 or Type 45 or 83. But the more powerful you make the Type 31, the less the step up to the Type 26 turning up. So basically, the more powerful you make the Type 31, the less you make that level of, oh yeah, right then. Well, now we've sent a Type 26 to really tell you that we are really, really interested in what's going on. John Shea, which ship was that taken a photo from then? I think it was taken from a destroyer, but I'm not sure which one. If we go back to the this photo. It's a rather cute photo. But this is sort of the point you have to sort of factor through in all your thinking. You have to think, what are your levels of response? For America, they've got a bit of an issue as well. Honestly, I was having a conversation with Sal Merculanos, which will come out next Wednesday as the build prompts next Wednesday. And we were talking through OPVs and the reality of OPVs. And the National Security Cutter and its capabilities versus the LCS versus the Constellation. And you sit there and go, well, in many ways, what the US Navy needs more is some more national security cutters and Constellations, and it didn't need the LCS. Oh, it needs some nuclear cruisers. Anyway, take care, Amelia. Hope you enjoy the catch up tomorrow. G-Down, if you build infrastructure to build ships, then you have to continue building ships to maintain the infrastructure. You have the wolf by the ears. You hope. Kyle goes, what's missing from the picture? The periscope's crosshair. In the nicest way, and I say this with all due love and affection, that group formation was ringed by so many frigating destroyers that any submarine which poked his periscope up was going to get death by sheer walling in of depth charges. I mean, there are about, I think there's somewhere in the region of, if I remember looking when I looked up this task script, there's somewhere in the region of 14 to 15 destroyers around this formation, plus some what were they? Were they frigates or were they frigates or sloops? I think that was sloops. There were some Black Swans as well there as well. In the nicest way, that's not a formation you want to fight. That's just not a formation you want to go anywhere near. If you're a sensible submarine commander, you avoid that formation. Anyway, this is tonight's topic, and I'm going to put a note saying we had a bit of a discussion, and then we get on to tonight's topic, just in case people get upset, because you know people do. People do. Ba da 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 da. So, What are we talking about? Well, this is an interesting question to start working in on. What are we talking about? Because the first thing I had to frame out in my mind was, what are the circumstances? And I'll get into this. But this was the nightmare being put forward by German propaganda in America at this period. That if, if Britain got its way, this is what Britain would do to America. They'd make most of America into New Britain. They'd make the West Coast into New Japan. I'm not sure how they have an Anglo-Mongolian Ocean. I'm not sure why the Pacific has become the Anglo-Mongolian Ocean. I'm not sure where that came from. Mexico's an Anglo-Japanese protectorate. Please notice the French are ignored in all this. New Orleans has become New Liverpool. That one I did find funny. Lord Northcliffe Gulf. Always got to pick on Lord Northcliffe. Lord Northcliffe. There seems to be multiple fluffs outside now. There are multiple fluffs. Gas attacks, dearest sister. Gas attacks. Lake Winston Churchill. Apparently the Royal Navy's renamed the Atlantic. I'm not sure why the Royal Navy would have renamed the Atlantic after years of fighting the Atlantic, but they did. They decided to call it Lake Winston Churchill. Queen Maryville. I presume that's replacing Maryland. Duke of Yorktown. Nice. London on the Potomac. Formerly Washington, D.C. There appears to be a small argument going on outside. Between fluffies. I think one fluff has spotted the other one's dog bowl in here. Apparently we're going to rename towns Asquith, Kitchener, Clarence, Purley, Plum Pudding. Oh no, it's Percy. King Edward City, Greytown, and there's an American reservation. Though I'm not sure why Lord Rathmore? Port Adam, New Gallipolis. That's a good one. Greytown, Worcestershire. It's just a wonderful thing to look at as a piece of propaganda. It really is. Generously enough, there's an American reservation. Are we talking about an American reservation on Latterkind? I'm not quite sure. You see, as a rule, one of the things which the Germans did like to harp on about was the fact that the British treatment of Native treatment of Native Americans was, well, how do I put this? Native Americans were often perceived as doing the work of the British at certain points in American history because it turned out a large part of the section of the forces which had defended Canada against American invasions of Canada had been Native American tribes. Some of them, who were technically from south of the border, had gone north to defend Canada from American invasion because they preferred the British to apparently the Americans. I'm not quite sure how that came about. I would have to read into it far more detail. I was reading the book which mentioned it as an aside and going, well, you're a fairly recent publication, and you're by a historian who I have met and who I have faith does a lot of quality research, so I'm going to take that at face value, but that is something I want to research at some point. There's already a fake London in Canada. I know. I don't think that really bothered the makers of this map. It's like the only city in Japan they seem to know about is Yokohama, so they've called the city New Yokohama. And I think they spelt that wrong. Paul from Chicago, why are they renaming Chicago? I have no idea. Apparently they are, though. If I get up the... I've got... Let me just find the map again. I've got the actual original image. But the point I'm making is that there is a very thorough literature going around on this idea of what happens if Britain takes over America. Yes, they've renamed Chicago Dry Rottingham. They've renamed somewhere New Sheffield. They've got Victoria. Lily Langtree, apparently. I'm still not sure why we renamed the place Worcestershire. I'm not sure why we would name someone Worcestershire. Sis, I need your advice on something. She's dodging before I ask her to pronounce Worcestershire. There's a corgi and a poodle outside my door at the moment. It's just a wonderful work of fiction. It really is an absolutely wonderful work of fiction. An absolutely wonderful work of fiction and propaganda. So, this is the actual fear that a war with America, Britain will end up taking over America. The reality is, I highly doubt, even under this circumstance, that any war would ever be really fought on American soil. And let me clarify that a bit further. Raiding may take place. There is certainly always a possibility of raiding. In fact, that it wouldn't surprise me at all, because that's straight out of the British Warfare Playbook. However, actual invasion of America, it's a very big place. It's a massive amount of logistics, and what do you gain from it? What do you need to do for it? So I don't think anything like that would happen, and I think the Americans, to an extent, realise this. Which is probably why German propaganda like this falls so flat. There is, though, a certain scenario you can see taking part. One of the things I had to sort of think about was World War I incidents happen that bring the US to enter the war on the side of Germany. The question is what kind of incidents, because every incident which happened, which could have been problematic for Britain versus America, Britain basically just didn't want a war with America as well as Germany, because that would have been problematic and definition of a two-front war. So Britain basically, within bounds of not losing face, conceded as much as they necessarily could to deal with the problem. Which brings me to my final problem. What are we talking about then? What kind of war scenario are we talking about? I think ultimately the scenario I came to, and I'll explain how I got into this, I had to come into a scenario where America was the aggressor. And I had a reasoning for that, is that I was looking through it, and the logicality of Britain attacking America when they're already at war with Germany is not something which is going to happen. To make that a viable, reasonable, logical case for the British to do, you would have to have America literally loading up merchant ships with goods for Germany and escorting them with their entire fleet across the ocean to Germany to try and run the blockade. And the thing is, that could maybe work if you're dealing with just Britain, but you have to remember Britain is on the side of France as well. So it's both Britain and France America be doing that to. And that's a problem, because doing that to Britain you might possibly be able to justify, but even then, that's kind of the aggressive move to do that. You can go freedom of the seas, but it's an active war zone, so there are limitations. The moment you're sending your whole fleet basically to escort a convoy through an active war zone, you're kind of asking for trouble. And I know I have suggested that sending fleets to escort things in Ukraine might be a viable idea on bilge pumps, etc. Oh, thank you. Just drop it on the floor. But, yes, I know you've been left with me. Yeah, you have been gassing out the girls so much you've been left with me. But that was based on the actual idea that that's the only way you can get those things running from either Ukraine or to Ukraine if you're using seaborne supply. And because, kind of quickly, that would kind of call Russia's bluff. And I severely doubt that Russia would actually do anything about said aforementioned convoy. However, with Britain, and especially considering the American Navy be running in short of fuel, because by the time they got to there they would be short of fuel, straight into the guns of the British Grand Fleet, it wouldn't be kind of a pretty thing to do. It would also be very stupid. Let's be honest, the South Carolina class are some of the dreadnoughts the US Navy has in service. 18.5 knots. Yeah, these are the things which, if they'd come first, would probably be calling dreadnought battleships Carolina battleships. And it would be pre-Carolinas. But the thing is, and this is going to sound terrible, Dreadnought's better than her. Dreadnought is better than a South Carolina. And that can be said to be egotistical, I know. People would say that's me being jingoistic, but look at South Carolina, look at Dreadnought next to each other, and try and make the case that South Carolina is better than Dreadnought. She's not. She's a good ship. I'm not saying she's a bad ship for her time. She's a good ship for her time. But she's not quite the jump from the ships previously to the all-big gun battleship that Dreadnought is. Can't forget Jack Ray. It's funny that New Britain Pacific was claimed as a protectorate by Germany in 1804. I guess the Germans were projecting again. They're out of fun. Donnercana. So the Germans dismantled the dictionary and hung it on the wall and then proceeded to throw darts until they had new place names? Potentially. Quick wiki browse. Perry arrived south of Yokohama. That might be the reference. Potentially. South of New Liverpool instead of New Orleans. They hold the grudge that long, possibly. How many Americans fell for it? Let's put it this way. The trouble is, the more the German government stop out various propaganda in America, the more they made it be an embarrassment to be a German American. Mr. ZZ. Hello, ZZ. Makes sense for the Scouts to take over New Orleans. Would make more sense for them to take New York, but I guess London wants all the money as usual. It's nylon, isn't it? It's New York, London. Nylon. It's all about the money. Come on, US invasion. Maybe bring a few million strong army from India? Yeah, but why? Why? Let's put it this way. The British have witnessed the American Civil War like everyone else. The British know that the Americans, once they push themselves and actually get organised, can organise very large armies. If you attack into America, you're going to antagonise that. If you leave America alone, it'll probably end up beating itself. My coach, US could convoy to Holland, neutral, and refuel in Dutch ports. Yes, they could. But if they convoy to Holland, that's not going to cause a problem because the British aren't blockading Holland. The British are allowing trade with Holland. In fact, it's the Germans who caused the trouble with the trade of Holland by occasionally sinking the vessels involved and attacking them as well. So yeah, the British would not mind about the Americans convoying to Holland. The Dutch might object to it, them being used in such a way, but the British wouldn't mind. But there again, once the American squadron's in Holland, where's it going from Holland? What's it going to do? My coach, Indian troops not to invade US but to defend Canada. Again, not necessarily the most necessary thing because Canada is an interesting place to attack. You start to realise very quickly, Canada is a very interesting place to attack. Or US retire. The discussion going on about the naming battleships after amendments. And Don Ricardo just put, well, the US, imagine the news the US lost the Second Amendment. No, imagine the worst news, US retires the Second Amendment. That would cause a revolution. It'd be a fun one. US retires the First Amendment would cause absolute uproar. Magnus, would the Germans have had better luck announcing they had rejected American proposal to Mexican proposal to attack the US? Yes, but the trouble is with the Zinnemann telegrams is that the British A managed to leak them and B that the Germans had to send them over British-controlled cables in the first place. Basically, just remember, if in doubt, and check who owns the telecom companies in the world and the major undersea cables, and you'll find that there's a certain nation which still does own a rather large percent of them, considering its size. Or maybe not considering its size, considering it's one of the world's largest economies, and it does happen to specialise as a national industry in sort of telecommunications. If you're Portrait come down through coastal waters, you're in the nicest way. If you're going to break a blockade, you don't skirt the blockade to try and break it. You break the blockade. Otherwise, you look like a... You either sail straight down the middle of the North Sea heading for Germany, or you don't. Because there is no blockade on stuff going to Norway, there is no blockade on stuff going to the Netherlands. The British are procuring stuff which is coming out of Norway, or possibly going to Norway, which is heading to Germany, and they are paying for it. You have to remember again, this is a very real trick the British use in the blockade. Instead of impounding goods, they purchase goods. Usually at a slightly above market rate, which causes a little bit of inflation. Now, all this fun leads to the next point. I thought I would quickly discuss Viscount Northcliffe, for whom the Gulf is going to be renamed. Because it came out kind of interesting. He is an interesting gentleman. He actually goes on a tour of America at one point, which is one of the reasons why he was put in, because he goes on a publicity tour of America for Britain. He's sent out there. He's a newspaper baron. I wouldn't call him the smartest man in the world. I wouldn't call him the most read man in the world, or the deepest thinker in the world. But he is incredibly good at the news. He's terribly good at presenting in a way people want to pay for it and read it. And he has this great quote about what the news is, and I wish it was more of the case today. News is something someone wants to suppress. Everything else is advertising. And for all the good and bad points of his personality, and I do realise he's a man who owned the Times, the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror, and also the Educational Book Company, which published the Children's Encyclopedia and all sorts of things to try and improve children's education, and had basically grown up and started his company off by running halfpenny periodicals, such as things like the Illustrated Chips. He is someone that in all his many facets, good and bad, is a powerful player in this period. Now, some historians like him, some don't. As a rule, from a naval policy perspective, he was important to the WW1 campaign. He was important in that he knew what he didn't know. But he did want power. This is what he's also saying. He wanted to be power. He wanted power, and this is used as a bad thing about him. But basically, he doesn't want power as in... the power to control things. He wants the power to influence things. To make people passionate about Britain. And in that way, he's a bit of a persuasive speaker and writer. He's quite a strong, persuasive personality. I've been struck when doing some research into him and what he gets up to. As part of this, and as part of other works I'm doing at the current time. And he's one of those people who sits down and talks with both Mahan and Corbett. He has no qualms who he listens to. He will go and talk to them. He publishes Corbett at times. He publishes Mahan at times. He publishes all these people. And he publishes them in a way, he gives them advice on how to reach and how to communicate with the broader public. He is also kind of interesting in that he says he has no head for business. So his brother run the business side of his business. So basically, he concentrates on making the news as good and as strong as possible. And all those papers as strong as possible. And his brother is the one who deals with making sure people get paid on time. The bills get paid on time. The money gets brought in on time. And all the other things. And they form a very good and very strong pair. I don't see how that's to his discredit. In fact, I can think of many things when it's if we're talking about the trip to Australia. As we've been, which ship shape's going on, and which there should be a link below, because we've got our last real week of fundraising if we want to make sure, if we want to really make sure that Gareth can come, because I would like him to be there. I really would. And we're hoping he probably at this time he won't be able to be there for the whole thing, but we're hoping he can come for at least Sydney and Canberra. And the reason is because it's very good to have him. It's very helpful. But also because that then provides, in the biggest and most important part, the multiplication of of Dan not just having to divide his time between helping me and Drac. It's basically we can team up. Dan can team up with whichever one of us after having spent X number of days with us already assisting us. He's less desiring to kill, and Gareth can take the one who Dan's got more murderous intent towards. You know, to assist, because we work as good as a four. We work as a very good team. You know, we each have our own capabilities. I will tend to focus on things like Twitter, on doing the 60-second shorts, doing the video recording in certain spaces where I'm used to going around, and I'm used to wandering around one-handed in ship spaces, and I know what's going to be strong enough for me and where I can position myself, so I do that sort of recording on the internals. Drac will do the drone flying and lots of recordings on the externals. He'll be doing that. Usually I get things like climbing up any funnels, etc., but that's because Drac, as we all know, doesn't do that well with heights. He's okay inside enclosed spaces, climbing closed spaces. Climbing up external spaces, up really spindly masts, etc., he has a little bit of fun doing. He will do it if he has to, but if he's got me there, I'll do it. And so we play to each other's strengths. Well, it's the same with the Northcliffe brothers. With the Harmsworth brothers. They play to each other's strengths. One of them is the front man / the communicator. The other one is the really good numbers per guy. And between them, they build an empire. And it's the Amalgamated Press is an absolutely massive empire of publishing. I would never call them servants because you have to remember there's also the sort of skills. It's like Dan, as we said, we go to things like the medical facilities and he will tell us more than we can ever get out there. But also, one of the things Dan is really good at, never let him not say he's good at this, he is really good at getting people to talk. He's really good at getting people to open up. So if we have someone who's nervous on camera, what we do, I probably shouldn't reveal our tricks on here, is Dan goes and talks to them for a few minutes first. So Dan sits and chats with them and gets them all calm, happy, no drugs involved, and they're all confident and happy after talking to Dan, and then we put them in front of the camera. And then they're far better and far happier. When he doesn't have that to do, he goes and winds up lady engineers and lady stokers, who then chase him around their engine room, threatening to planning on committing, mild pain because he's just put a note on something he's not supposed to. Gareth the Brit. Now that is a mind you want to have there, because again, he has all these little bits of knowledge of history, these obscure bits which are really useful, really pop in the whole things. But the other thing he does, you tend to stick him down with the museum's social media team. Excuse me. You sit him down their social media team, and you sit him down with those people, and he will sort out for them exactly what they need to do. He will help them with what they're doing. He'll basically, it's a free consultation with one of the best people in the world at social media. And you sit there and go, yes. So it's a whole team effort, and it maximizes the capabilities. Hello. Ooh. Ooh. It's kind of like, we're a team effort, aren't we, Rob?
Don't believe that. You're my servant. I am a fluffy research assistant. I'm gorgeous.
Hello. Yes. You keep jumping into the video today. You're being extra loving, and I am trying to get it live. Ah! Thank you, done. Sit down and go to sleep. There you go. Hey, by gum. Sorry, I'm just sending a message to request biscuits for the poodle. Definitely. And I've sent the message now. You've got biscuits on the way. He's always back to commit more gas warfare. Thank you, Stafford, for testing for both count 3 down. Ah, the Delaware class. Now again, these, far cuter. Far, far cuter. I have a real affection for the Delaware class. And I'm not sure why. But I do. This is despite the fact that, really, in comparison to the Carolinas, there's not, you can't really be certain, what the difference is. Well, the difference is that the Carolinas are laid down in 1906. They are. They're laid down in 1906. But Delaware's laid down in 1907. And the Delawares, well, one of them gets vertical triple expansion engines, of course, the Delaware. And the North Dakota gets steam turbines. Both have 2 screws. But they go up from 16,000 tons on the Carolinas to 20,380 tons on Delawares. They go up from, well, let's be honest, an armor belt of 12 inches on the belts and a 2.5 inch deck on the South Carolinas to a between 9 and 11 inch, well, a 9 to 11 inch sort of belt scenario and all sorts of armor around on the Delawares. But more importantly, they have 10 12-inch guns in 5 twin turrets. And they are super firing. And I like that. I like the fact that the Americans, I know the previous ones were super firing, but they were super firing in a way of sort of, it looked like it was the ship's structure which was super firing. Let's be honest. Let's go back to that picture. I mean, it doesn't look like super firing properly in a way. Whereas these are super firing properly. They do look like proper ships. For some reason. I just like them. I just like the Delaware class. Sounds good, History Vanguard. 2 of my friends are like Dan and Gareth, and there is me and my other friend who do technical bits with cameras and computers and info dump quite a lot. Yeah, it's, the thing about Gareth is he will go around, wander around, talking to people, and suddenly we'll get told, this person, you've got to do this person live. This story's got to be done live. And that's another reason why we need him for Sydney, because Sydney is going to be massive. I cannot overstate how big Sydney is going to be in terms of an operation to get it done. Almost looks British except mask. I can see your point there. I can see your point. They do... They do certainly have stylings. But they also have the fact they have that sort of the I think there's also part of me which likes the aft deck because it's sort of turret X turret is raised, and and then there's a Y and a Z turret. And the reason I call them a Y and a Z turret is because Y turret is actually pointing towards the main superstructure, and sort of does that, and Z turret is backwards doing that. And so it's a case of, yeah, both can theoretically turn in arcs of roughly 270 degrees. Apart from one of them, if it fires in the middle 90 degrees of that arc, can cause severe damage to its superstructure, because it's spending most of its time aiming at the rest of the ship, and it's kind of like there's a gun at the back of the ship pointed at the ship's engine rooms going, "You will go faster, or I will blast you." I think that's one of the reasons why I like the Delaware class. But, you know, cuteness, old cuteness. The US do produce many cute battleships. Before you ask too much about why, I wonder too much about why there are American battleships coming up here, is because one of the things I'm going to talk about is the fact that the Americans really aren't prepared for war. Okay? They really aren't. This is going to be a factor into... Because the other day I had an interesting conversation on Twitter where basically I said the US Navy wasn't that massive a navy in the run-up to World War One, and didn't really become the powerful navy we'd recognise it until after World War One, and during the treaty era. And someone's going, they're the fourth largest navy in the world at their time, and I'm sort of going, yeah, there's being the fourth largest, number 4 on paper, and there's being the fourth, number 4 in reality. You think the next emoji should be a Commonwealth gas mask? Might well be. I think I need about that's details that I'm not sure how many more subscribers, as in people who joined the channel, I need to get to another emoji. But I was sent a note about it the other day. Customization, branding. Members. Loyalty badges. Good lord. Come on. Yes, I need... I'm currently on 78 members. For the next level, I need to get 90 members. So for next emoji, I need to get 90 members, I think. And I have peaked. The peak I had, I've been up to, was 89. And so it's sort of gone up and down, but at the moment I'm on 78, and the peak I had was... the peak I've had was 89, yes. Yeah. Oh no, the peak I had was 103. But that was back in January for about 1 hour. Not sure why. I had 103 for an hour. Name a time the US went to war ready. Outside the Spanish-American War, maybe. Well, that's the thing. They don't go to... But the trouble is, there's going to war ready... It's what scenario you have with going to war ready. Okay? And this is the issue you basically are talking about into this scenario. Because, as I've said, the only way... The most likely of the many very unfeasible ways you can get war starting between America and Britain in World War One period is the Americans actually actively pushing for war or actually just attacking. And that's incredibly unlikely, but it's more likely than the British picking a second fight. Especially with the issues that would cause, because let's be honest, the British Army would also almost immediately lose the chance of fighting their lovely European war, which they've been preparing for years to fight, which was going to give them glorious victory and finally show their value versus the Royal Navy. Because they wouldn't, in the nicest way, if Britain had to choose between defending France or helping defend the Empire, they're going to be sending in troops out to defend the Empire, and they're going to tell France to look after itself. They're going to give them enough support, but they're going to tell France, you're taking the lead. Vision, yes, well, it was very short on cruisers, especially in World War One. After the war, it was a battleship destroyer navy. It was definitely a battleship destroyer navy. Don't know. So going to Australia is like D&D. You need a wizard, a warrior rogue, a rogue, and a cleric, plus 2 backers. No, I think as Drac has put it, going to... Well, there is a nice video floating around where he describes me as the tank of the D&D group because I'm slightly more organised. I'm sorry, Dan. You are probably the cleric. You're the healer. Gareth is definitely the talking one of us, let's say. He is most definitely has the gift of the gab when he needs to. So that's his role. And then, yeah, me and Drac are the two sort of combat-orientated types. I'm the tank. For the life of me, I've forgotten the other one, the one he is. But basically, he's basically hopping. His description of him was hopping around, attacking everything. It was a classic D&D party he was going through. But also, there's the fact that I usually the bard. Definitely the bard. Definitely. Gareth is the type who in D&D game is going to have maximum charisma. So, what is the first problem for Americans when Americans join the war? Well, for starters, the Americans have a small issue in that Germans were the largest non-English speaking minority group in the US at the time of World War I. This is one of the problems with them joining the war against Germany. This causes issues for them, okay? But the 1910 census counted more than 8 million first and second generation German Americans in a population of 92 millions. 92 million. The largest... this is one of the reasons why they, despite being outraged by the German invasion of Belgium and all these things, they send Belgian relief and all sorts of support and assistance that way, but they don't want to get involved in the war because they have a large German immigration population. The trouble is, whilst you will often hear about certain immigration groups in America. One of the largest immigrant groups you hear very little about when you come from European circles, or definitely. I'm not sure about the American viewers can commentate about whether they hear more about this, and that's English immigration to America. The English accounted for roughly 40% of the population, of roughly English immigrants, i.e. first, second generation, although it did first, second, or to an extent third generation, but there does seem to be some closing in generations, accounts for roughly 40% of the population, or roughly 32 million. There is a problem because the English became instantly almost part of the mainstream. So whilst you still have this to this day, politicians proudly proclaim their Irish, even Scottish roots, very few to none will mention their English roots in American political life. This is probably to an extent back to the American Revolution, etc., but there is a scenario going on here. There are some estimates of America's population in the 1790s, which is kind of interesting in that it's 47.9% English. There are figures as high as 60.94%, depending on how you're losing the areas. And it should be noted that rather like German Americans sort of reduces a population identified during World War I to become European American, or usually just white American, the English American got subsumed into European white American by about 1960s. So this explains why in the 1980s the figures were nearly 24 million claimed in only English ancestry, and nearly 26 million claiming partial English ancestry, i.e. by about 1960s there are about, 1980s there are only about 50 million claiming even partial English ancestry in America. However, I would also add that the joy is one of the core parts of American politics for many years was WASPs, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They were quite a large group. And this, if you think the German-American lobby caused trouble for going to war against Germany, historically, especially during the American Civil War, but post the American Civil War, there is a large group within America who will cause trouble for going to war with Britain. Because whilst there are some who will use the cause of the American Revolution, etc., and Britain as the original enemy, therefore, to try and whip up support for attacking Britain, there are also a large number of them who have roots with Britain. And whilst they have emigrated from Britain to America for a reason, they don't tend to want to go to war with Britain. So this makes it difficult, okay? This really does. It's true. Apparently people find info dumping scary. Info dumping can be scary, but you have to learn... Well, I've had to learn tricks of how to manage it. Basically, I tend to tap my fingers on my leg as I'm talking. And once I reach 10 taps, I then go... every time I reach 10 taps, I look at the eyes and go, are you looking interesting still, or are you starting to glaze over? If you're glazing over, stop. So it's just a tap, 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 tap on my phone. And some people don't like it, but it's the method I have of stopping myself info dumping. Now, that is the other problem. The big trouble with all this scenario is that Germany is considered an autocracy. An autocracy. It is considered an empire. Whereas Britain, whilst it is considered a global empire, Britain itself is considered, even by American standards at the time, as a democracy. Just remember, before anyone starts going back and going, but America, they have the vote. They do have the vote in Britain as well. It's a limited franchise, just as limited in America at this point. Basically, the franchise is limited to people that we like. The franchise is always limited to people we like. Let's be honest. The franchise is always limited in some ways. Even to this day, there are limitations on franchises. For example, people who are in jail can't vote. That's a limitation on the franchise. It's a limitation on the franchise most people agree with. If you're in jail, if you committed a crime worthy of going to jail, you have lost your right to vote. You have, by behaving, by carrying out some sort of act which has invalidated your freedom of citizenship, you have lost your right to vote. Now, I do agree that there are issues. Before anyone starts telling me off on this point, there are issues in different places in the world and who gets put in jail and why they get put in jail. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's a generalization. Okay? So, there are issues with supporting Germany. There are issues with supporting Britain. Even with this majority group, it takes till 1917 and all sorts of issues for America to enter the war on the side of the alliance, of the Entente. But remember, you reverse these numbers in the case of war with Britain and France, because you've got to add in all the French and the French-connected populations as well. Because again, you have to remember, this is not just war against Britain. This is war against France. This is probably going to be war against Italy. So, it's war against Britain, Italy, France, and Italy. Those are three very large groups of populations which have come to America, who are not going to be happy, necessarily, all of them, or in fact, possibly the majority of them, about going to war against their countries. The German population, a large number of them, were not happy about going to war against Germany, but a large number of them have emigrated from Germany because of this autocratic scenario in Germany. Alright, my English ancestors were well embedded by the time of the American Revolution, let alone 1900s. Very true. Vision. German descendants are the largest ethnic group in America today. They're not. They're not. The German descendants were never the largest group. They were never the largest group even in that period. They do settle in certain areas in quite large numbers, but they are never really the largest group. It's one of the things that, as said in this one, of the 92 million people, the population, German Americans are roughly 8 million, and the English Americans in their sort of heritage, you could call them, is 32 million. So that's slowly making up 40 million out of the 90 million in total. But one is less than a tenth, and one is over a third. Wasps are still a very big thing in politics today. Yes, but they don't usually call themselves wasps like they used to. And America is supposed to be a republic, not a democracy. Yeah, but it's a democratic republic. Please note, it is a democratic republic. Yes, it is a republic, but you can have versions of a republic which are not democratic. Trust me, if you could, you would use certain examples from history. Andrew Cruz, it would mean war against Canada too. That might mean a ground war in North America. Yes, and I'll be getting into that. This is another factor you have to remember, But now you have the Florida class. Always good to remember the Floridas. They come in at 21,800 tons, so they put on nearly, 1,420 tons versus the Delawares. For that, they still have 10, 12-inch guns. They still have pretty much the same armor profile. And but they have now gone from having 2 screws. So Delaware's had 2 screws. The Carolinas had I think 2 screws. To having 4 screws. So the Florida class have 4 engines. So in the USS North Dakota, she has 4 Curtiss steam turbines. In the Delaware, they have 4 vertical. They have 2 sets of in Florida, in both Florida and Utah, they have 4 Parsons steam turbines. Actually, I do apologize. I was reading my notes wrong. Now, interesting that one to point out. Please notice Parsons steam turbines. By the way, this is nothing unusual. It's one of the really interesting things of the naval race in the 1900s. And I'll be getting to this when the building of Fleets of Jutland comes out probably Sunday morning. That's probably going to be some Sunday morning viewing. I'll stick that up. Because I'm doing that. It's going to be finished and it's going to be recorded up tomorrow morning as finalised. And one of the stats which you get into in that is you start to look at the supply of turbines to Germany, and the supply of turbines to America, and the supply of turbines to all sorts of places. And you start to realise that Parsons are not just supplying a large number of turbines for the UK. Parsons are supplying turbines for pretty much everyone else as well, to some extent, or to a lesser or greater extent, because they are the best turbine maker in the world, and they win a lot of turbine contracts. Now, the Americans work on building up what's called Curtiss turbines, and then the Curtiss and Brown start to work together and form basically the Brown-Curtiss turbine system, which becomes the second turbine maker, and that's a really, really good company, a really good scenario. But basically, it's the best American company forms up with the other very good turbine company in the UK, and they combine together to make some really, really good turbines. And that also is a source of turbines for the British and the Americans. But Germany's turbine production is very slow to come on the line. So much so that if you're looking at their battle cruisers, it's not until you get the Mackesons that you have anything which doesn't have a Parsons turbine in it, as it's built. And the reason I'm bringing this up here is, again, this will be a factor in a war, because spare parts for a turbine. Now you can go, well, they can just replace the Parsons turbine with a Curtiss turbine. They can. But if you're going to replace turbines in a ship, and they're replacing a whole turbine, that ship's going to be out of service for a while it gets its turbine replaced. That's not going to be a quick or easy job, is it? Thank you, Jack Ray. So, if you're doing that, that takes time. Hi, Constantinople. Let's see. Missed some questions. Vision. The Economist reports that German Americans are America's largest single ethnic group. I read this on other sources. German migration spread out over 300 years, starting with Penn. I'm not quite sure about I think The Economist, I seem to remember reading the results, The Economist, the phrase I found was it was the largest non-English speaking ethnic group. And that's what I have as the quote in here. If we go back, I have backing up this and where this largest non-English speaking minority group in the US at the time of World War I. And that's what I have. I have it as the largest non-English. I have it always with that qualifier. So I'm not sure what's... could be wrong, but so far I read a few sources and they've all had that same scenario. Thank you, Jack Ray, for those 10 memberships. I would add the various ethnicities from Austria-Hungary, about 5 to 6 million. Yes, but they theoretically on the German side. Theoretically. Some of them aren't. Blackburn Maximus, does American mines seem to deal with the mines of the iron will be dropping off the coast and harbours? Not really at this point, but they would probably do a lot of trawler work, trawler hires as the British would. I had an interesting conversation again with someone on Twitter who basically said all trawlers that the Royal Navy used in World War II were taken up from trade. No, about 200 or so were built. I have a video about it on my channel. Andrew Cruz, also, if your family emigrated from Germany in 1910, are you still German ethnicity in 2023? Less likely, I would argue. I would agree with that one, but, you know, some people will be. So anyway, what I don't get, Americans have built the ship in pairs of 2 ship classes, North and South Dakota and Canada, and they don't use them in 2 ship classes. Why? Because they build them in 2 ship classes, but some are built with turbines and some are built with triple expansion engines. So that means operating together, they have different operating profiles. Some you can operate them together, but then that means you tend to be limited by the worst of both worlds. Vision, and The Economist did divide up Hispanics like how you usually divide up did divide up Hispanics like how you usually divide up Europeans. It's interesting. Hello, Vicky Gross. Vicky Goss, I think I got that right. And hello, Shane Sterney, and oh, thank you, Ken McGuire. Hello, Emma Stones, Alex Hunt, Miles Jenkins, and Mr. Serenison. Thank you, everyone. British Empire would have to make the Canadian yards pump out the escorts. Yeah, they might do. Andrew Gross, Bichon, I divide into purchase Portuguese speaking, Spanish speaking, French speaking. That's because culture matters to me more than genetics. Purchase, obviously a typo. Yeah. Sorry. Hello, David Golden. No worries. But to your point, Doctor, by 1940, many descendants from German immigration are 3rd or 4th generation, have intermarried and don't see themselves as German Americans, but as Americans. And that's the same with quite a lot of the other populations as well. It's one of the interesting things. Let me put it this way. The people who often see the divisions are people who are looking for them as a way to categorize people. The people themselves don't see the divisions. I often will point that shouting, I am this and I represent all people who are this, as a politician is a very cheap way to get votes. It's a very, very cheap way to try and get votes. And it isn't good for the wider country. It might get you elected. It isn't good for the wider country. As I mentioned, some trawlers were built in Germany. Yeah, some trawlers were built in Germany. Next problem is one of my favorite historians. Yeah! Nicest way, Britain has a habit of occasionally getting run by historians. So does America. They got run by Roosevelt, they've got run by Wilson, and they've got run by Roosevelt again. All 3 historians. When you've been run by economists, you've had issues. When run by historians, they've usually done a fairly decent job as long as they've been able to do it. He has a PhD in history from Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, with writing a thesis of congressional government, a study in American politics. He served as chair of jurisprudence and political economics economy at Princeton, where he stayed until he became president of Princeton University. He then left to become the governor of Jersey, and then after that he ran for the presidency. Both times, and in the second election, when he's getting elected in 1916, he runs on the platform of he kept us out of the war. The point is about the 28th President of the United States, who's our president from the 4th of March 1913 to the 4th of March 1921. You couldn't have a more ardent believer in A, the power of Congress and the importance and primacy of Congress, and B, someone who believes in the power in peace. He so believes in peace, he has a 14-point plan for how to preserve peace, and he proposes the League of Nations, which, as we all know, is commonly considered the forerunner, at least in conceptual terms, of the United Nations. Just it falls apart because he's not around to see that America enters it. Oh, good lord. Knight 631, I think you've added a 0 onto that figure. Right then. In the Second World War, the Royal Navy requisitioned 215 trawlers. They built another 200 odd. So they had roughly 415 trawlers in World War II. No, they didn't have 2,000. In World War One, the Royal Navy decided to basically built mostly somewhere in the region of, well, that's 300, 400. Again, roughly 420. Vision. President Wilson looks worse and worse as time goes on. Invaded Mexico twice, federal segregation of African Americans, failed to get the US into the League of Nations. Yeah, honestly, he has lots and lots of issues. When he's elected as a progressive Democrat. And you have to remember the reason he manages to win the presidency is in many ways the Republican vote is split. Behind the Republican Party chose to try and get, what's his name? 27th President of the United States. Taft re-elected. And this is after some backroom dealing had seen Roosevelt not selected as their candidate. And so Roosevelt ran as the leader of the Bull Moose Party, came second to Wilson. If Taft hadn't been running, or Wilson hadn't, or Roosevelt hadn't been running, Wilson probably wouldn't have won his first term. Yeah, nice to hear everyone. I don't know where you're getting the figure of 2,000 from, but no. The Royal Navy at no point had 2,000 trawlers. The Royal Navy couldn't have operated 2,000 trawlers. So, no, I'm not sure where you have got that list from. But that's off today's topic, by a long way. Do we differentiate? No, we don't differentiate between trawlers and drifters on this level. And that still wouldn't make it up to 2,000 ships. Let's put it this way. 2,000 ships requiring on average 30 crew. That's 60,000 personnel on trawlers alone. For a Royal Navy that in World War II would stand at, let's see, roughly 800,000 by 1944. Yeah, and you've also got to man about 100 or so corvettes. You've got to man. Once you're into it, you're not putting 60,000 into trawlers. 2,000 ships in the RO overall, more likely. Yeah, if you consider the Royal Navy had 164 destroyers, 60. Yeah, you're not getting 2,000 trawlers. No, I don't think the British trawler fleet is that big. I think Wilson is partly the reason for polar bloodshed in Eastern Europe after the war. Wilson has a lot of ideals. He wouldn't be regarded as a progressive politician by the orders of the day, by today's standard, but he was considered progressive to an extent by his own period. But you have to remember, he is how do I put this politely? He's stubborn as anything. Honestly, it's the Wilson way or no way. When he's running for president, and when he's running for even governor of Jersey, he doesn't want to take any money from big companies. He wants to take small donations from people, from individuals, etc. Well, 96831, there just isn't the capability of the Royal Navy to requisition that many trawlers. Now, if you're talking about the entire Allied Navy and entire navies in World War II using them, pretty much every navy used some trawlers for some duties. But during World War I, the auxiliary patrol had operated 1,400 trawlers in World War I, and there were 627 Admiralty trawlers, which were Royal Navy vessels. In World War II, No. Uh, the auxiliary patrol is not recreated. There's the Royal Navy Patrol Service, but well, yeah, they mostly have motor patrol boats, and they have some flyer class built vessels and some trawlers. But they no, your World War One, there is that auxiliary service which is not part of the Royal Navy, which has 1400, but that's World War One, not World War Two. And they're basically the auxiliary patrol is, to be honest, it's the fishing ships which are going out fishing anyway. Santa Canaria, the numbers are just going even bigger and bigger and bigger. All the patrol areas for the auxiliary patrol are basically fishing areas. They're where the ships are going to fish anyway. By calling them auxiliary patrol, they're getting to give the fishing boats some means of defending themselves against submarines, so they don't have to send them an escort. Hey, caramba. Yeah. The trawlers were literally retrofitted with either 3, 6, or 12-pounder guns, as well as the 7.5-inch bomb throwers, anti-submarine howitzers. And they had a signaller and a gunner attached to each ship. That was it. They were crewed by fishermen and led by merchant navy men commissioned into the Royal Navy Reserve. Usually it was the skipper of the boat was given a Royal Navy commission, and they were called the Auxiliary Patrol, so that when they carried weapons and fired on enemy ships, they were not a spy ship, they were a legal warship. So yeah, that's the Auxiliary Patrol. That's World War One. That's 1918. For a ship to be requisitioned into service, it has to be specific things. 9681, and it's not. They're not being put under a white ensign. They're not being used as a Royal Navy warship. The patrols for World War II do not list that organisation being stood up again. I haven't heard about it being stood up again. I could be wrong, but I've got a book on trawlers in World War II behind me, and I don't think I've read through it, and I can't remember it mentioning that. I'm fairly sure I remember a mention of it saying they had several thousand vessels. Listen, Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson are all progressive, just that Taft wasn't progressing fast enough for Roosevelt. They're all progressives to an extent, but there is a difference between Republican progressive and Democratic progressive. Dunner, if Griffin, if you want to go check your sources, there is actually a pretty good one. There is actually a pretty good list of sources out there and where they're available from. There are some fairly good books. I will drag them out for you at some point. Just send me a message on Discord and I'll message them. I'll pick them out. But yeah, one of the first things I go and check the numbers against would be things like U-Boat Net, Royal Naval Patrol Service booklet. And there's a whole directory on Harry Tate's Navy and the things they got up to in World War II. The Royal Naval Patrol Service of World War II. But as said, in World War II, they don't seem to get the thousands added to them of trawlers that the Auxiliary Patrol has in World War I. So I'm presuming that's probably because in World War II, they were less worried about surface action with their trawlers. Hello, Melanie. And now we have the Wyoming class. And yes, I will mention the Wyoming class. I know who's going to... What's the betting? My usual troll who doesn't like it whenever we wander off in a live and we have multiple discussions going on live. Comments. This was very distracted this evening, and I go, yes, it was, because we had lots of interesting chats going on live while we were talking about it. And we're talking around the concept of what happens if America does join World War I, and there's a lot of information to be talked about. But also there was a long discussion going off on one about trawlers. Then we have the Wyoming class. They're coming in at 26,000 tons. So these things, they've put in 4,200 tons since the Floridas. They have 12 12-inch guns. Wyoming. They're coming for you. And they, of course, have six turrets. And as you can see, I'm not even quite sure how A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, W, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. So they have a W turret, then an X turret, then a Y turret, then a Z turret. Okay? And W and Y are super firing, and X and Z are on the deck. So they basically have a turret farm aft. You can now build a Wyoming. You can build a Wyoming in UAD. That could be interesting. How quickly is the vessel in that photo moving? Well, I would say this. They had 4 Parsons steam turbines. And they had a top speed of 20.5 knots for the Wyoming class. So yes, this vessel and cannot even go as fast as the Florida and Delaware class could go. But that's fine, because it can go faster than the South Carolinas, which can only do 18 knots. But it has got a broadside of 12-inch guns. Yeah, this is the trouble with my brain. I have to actually sing it out, and the singing out in my head seemed a bit wrong. So I was working out, going, what is the fourth one in the alphabet? I was trying to work it backwards, and I couldn't. My brain was just not working the alphabet backwards, so I ended up singing the whole way through. Nice one. So U-boat.net is a better source. U-boat.net is a pretty darn good source because the people who run U-boat.net are obsessive about getting their stuff right. I don't always agree with what they say in terms of their analysis, but their facts are usually spot on. So here is the point I've been trying to make. Taft and Wilson are not exactly kept up with defense spending. There is a reason historically when the USA joins World War I in April 1917, it spends a lot of time and money buying stuff of the British and French. I mean, their troops arrive in Europe and get re-equipped with British and French equipment. It's one of the scenarios that happens in World War II is that basically the Americans ship over raw materials as quickly as they can along with their personnel, and the raw materials have to arrive first so the British and French can make them into weapons for them. Because America has not used the intervening few years to build up their defense industry to be able to a war footing. They haven't. Even with the orders they've been getting from Britain and France and other allied nations during the war, they have still not been building up their things to a war footing. So 12 times 400, so Scharnhorst would have been quaking in boots for 20 minutes to take sort of steam out of range of their blundering into it. Yeah. In terms of Dreadnought, battleships launched and commissioned by the 30th of June 1915. Remember, they have no battle cruisers, so they only have battleships. They have 2 South Carolinas, 2 Delawares, 2 Floridas, 2 Wyomings, and 2 New Yorks. They have 2 Nevadas and 2 Pennsylvanias, which are both launched but not yet commissioned by June 1915. The New Mexicos aren't launched till 1917, and the Tennessees in 1919. So, in simple terms, this is by June 1915. It gets even worse if you start this earlier. If you go back to January 1915, it gets positively lonely. But the point there is pretty much the Americans have 10 dreadnoughts, of which the best are probably the New Yorks, which are their 27,200 ton, 21-inch, 10 14-inch gun ships, USS New York and USS Texas. And you don't mess with Texas. So I agree. Those are good ships. Those are ships the Royal Navy's going to have to worry about. They've got 14-inch guns. They are the big threat of the US Navy's firepower at this point are the New Yorks. The Nevadas, the standard types, and the Pennsylvanias, the first of the standards, they aren't in service yet. But let's be honest, when the Nevada come into service, they are going to again... And here's the other thing with the New Yorks. The New Yorks are twin-screwed triple expansion engines. Yes, they can do 21 knots, but they're triple expansion engines. So maintaining their full speed for a long time is going to be an interesting scenario. There's also the fact they've only got twin screws, whereas the Wyomings had 4 screws and 4 Parsons steam turbines. The Nevadas coming up, well, Nevada has steam turbines and 2 screws, and Oklahoma has 2 triple expansion engines and 2 screws. The Pennsylvanias have 4 screws and 4 sets of, on Pennsylvania, Parsons steam turbines. Curtis steam turbines on Pennsylvania, Parsons on Arizona. New Mexico's are laid down in October 1915, April 1915, and January 1915. So they would have been laid down at least. But they're not launched till 1917, and they are not commissioned. Well, USS Mississippi is commissioned in December 1917 after being launched in January 1917. But Idaho isn't commissioned till March 1919, and New Mexico isn't commissioned till May 1918. So yes, it is Texas and New York versus... you have to come up with a sort of scenario for what they might do. And honestly, when I start looking at Navy, you're going, what are you going to do? Now, you could stand there and go, well, Alex, if you add their available, for 10, let's say 10, 12, 14, 10 ships, let's say they've got available, onto the 21 ships in terms of dreadnoughts the German Navy can provide, that could almost meet the Grand Fleet at full strength. And I'm going to open up my notes on the Grand Fleet here, because let's consider what strength that would be reaching at, that would be meeting it at, because I don't think that would actually help. At the Battle of Jutland, which takes place, of course, in 1916, there are 44 dreadnought battleships there, of which the Royal Navy provides the 44 dreadnought battleships and 14 battle cruisers there. So there are 58 vessels, of which the Royal Navy provides 37, and the Germans provide 21. Add in the 10 from the Americans, you have 31 versus 37, but I don't think the Germans would exactly be happy with support of the American fleet. I think they might well start crying, because they're even slower than their ships. And also, you have to get them there. And for the British, that would be a very simple thing. So to try and block off. So I don't think any scenario of we can be talking about is going to envisage any linking up of the American and German fleets. I don't think it's going to happen. And as Mike Gucci just said, if the USA and dreadnoughts are on the Atlantic, the Japanese would have fun in the Pacific. They would. So, what other things are we talking about? Well, as we've discussed, the US Navy in this period is criminally short of cruisers. They have no battle cruisers. Their destroyers, whilst they will produce one of the best and largest production runs of destroyers of any nation in World War I with the 4 stackers, they are years away from starting that production run, and they have nowhere near accrued the experience that will go into that production run, and they are not doing that production run before war really begins. How Longbow won? Von Spey, was he discussed? I guess he can go now, go somewhere. Well, this is the thing. One of the scenarios for him, of course, is he runs to America and he provides extra ships to the Americans, which does help them with some of their cruiser needs in the Pacific Fleet. But I would say, compared to the sheer Armageddon that is going to come their way from the Japanese at close range, and the Australians and New Zealanders, and the things that HMAS Sydney and HMS New Zealand and the various Japanese vessels can get up to, that would not be a good idea. We'll talk about that in a bit. But also, there's the very real prospect that actually America doesn't switch sides early enough, and Coronel and the Falklands still happen, and so his force still doesn't exist. No, as I see it, US cannot project power away from the US coast. US best strategy is to patrol the East Coast, threaten Canada, and let Germany bleed the Entente with his last breath. Yeah, but Japan... this is all going to hurt, basically. Because I said already, America hasn't built up. Well, America doesn't have the industry or anything that builds up during World War I and at the end of World War I. This is the point. Even the industry the arms industry they built up during World War One doesn't exist at this point. It's kind of painful. Blackmail Maximus, what is the command staff like for the US during this alternate World War One? I haven't really wanted to touch that with a 10-foot barge pole. Mainly because the US command structure is sufficiently strange at this point that it's going to be an issue. Rome Total War 3 could be interesting. I'm presuming that's what RTW3 means. But I think it's Rome Total War Remastered. That was more recent now, but we'll see. Yeah. This, of course, is the New York class. This is what the US Navy will be pinning its hopes on if any ships from the Royal Navy turn up. The last of the pre-standards. They are capable. USS Texas is still around to this day. But again, they're twin-screwed ships, and there is a big problem with building a twin-screwed battleship, okay? You might talk about, well, their range and all these things, but the other problem with twin-screw battleships is if they get damage. You see, if you have one engine damaged on a 4-screw ship, you still have 3 screws to get you through the water. So you can do that. Rule the ways free. Ah, that's different. And yes, I am looking forward to that. But you had the capital T instead of the small t, and so I thought it was Rome Total War. Yeah. The big problem for the Americans, and this whole scenario is going to be a catch-22. They go into this war, they think they're going to get a victory. They're not. It's going to be painful. And if we skip ahead, so how do we make this work as an alternate history? Well, the only real options to make it work as an alternate history I had to go through was I had to start thinking about, okay, when has America actually before decided to sign up with an autocrat, and why did they do it? And I thought, well, War of 1812. And that's the real problem for the Americans. They have very clear war goals they can develop, but what was the War of 1812 fought over? Well, it was fought over trade, it was fought over impressment. Impressment's not going to be taking place at this point. It's a bit easier to tell who's who and differentiation between American and British. It's how do I put it politely? For America, there are clear goals you can build into this. But there are also scenarios which are put in place after the War of 1812-14 to stop it happening again. So you basically have to go back a long time and try and edit out some of those controls put in place. What if, at this point, in the nicest way, I don't see the British trying Dardanelles, because there is a reason for the British not to try Dardanelles at this point. Where are the troops going to come from? Where are the Australian troops going to come from? We'll talk about this all in a second. You're jumping a bit ahead, because I need to sort of set up for the alternate history. when I started working on this and putting it through it, this actually reminded me of a question. That's questions I sometimes set my students to make them think. How much of the history is already set about? How much of the positioning of nations has been confirmed by things that have happened over hundreds of years? And this is part of the problem with this scenario. There are so many things, parts of history you have to change to get this to a scenario to actually take place. But hand-wavium, minimal options, is War of 1812. So you use the War of 1812 as your basis. Maximus, what garrison troops from the Mediterranean? The British do not have a massive global land force. They have the Indian Army, they have the Australian Volunteers, the Canadian Volunteers, and they have the British Expeditionary Force. They don't really have large garrisons around the world. British Empire is often ruled through image rather than real power. That's why when people do stupid, immoral things like certain generals do in India, they cause real trouble. Because the whole point is the British rule through power in terms of perception of power, rather than exercise of power. That's how the British maintain order. Because when you exercise power, you can provide people with a casus belli, a rallying call. As long as they perceive you have the power, they don't cause you too much trouble. The moment you exercise your power, you give them a reason to cause you trouble, which means you have to exercise more power, which means you have to do a lot of cost. Like Maximus, how many French colonial troops are there going to be? And they're going to be all called to fight in France. So how do it work hand-wavium as an answer of history? We have to use the War of 1812. But there's a problem for the Americans in this period. Because there is a global communication system. There is a person called Northcliffe, who has global press going on. Lots of press all around the world. Which means you're going to have a problem. The Nevadas. The first of the standards. They were commissioned in March 1916 and May 1916. They would have commissioned theoretically in time for the Battle of Jutland, but of course we're a long way away and not actually at war at that point. But Nevada and Oklahoma are only commissioned in 1916, launched in 1914. Which is why it's quite so funny when people say, oh, Oklahoma was the old battleship sunk in 1941. At Pearl Harbor. Old? She's not yet 30 years old. She's been through a midlife upgrade. She's not a midlife crisis yet. Ain't she old? She's not ancient. Yes, she has a 13.5-inch belt and 2.9 inches of deck armor. Yes, she's got a speed of 20 knots. So again, in typical American battleship styles, they seem to... Their battleships don't seem to be that fast or long-legged. Nevada was sunk as a target in July 1948. Yeah, it is old in quotation marks. But basically this means we have what to give us a casus belli? Well, we have causes. Greed. They decide they've got a promise of Canada. Free trade, anti-blockade. So they're so focused on the free trade argument, they don't want to think Britain should have the right to impose a blockade on anyone or anything, even in a war. They're using that as their argument. Fear of the Yellow Peril, well, fear of Japan. As you can see, the Germans are playing as that by giving a whole set of the West Coast to Japan. And a secret alliance with Germany. That is the only way I could really give them a casus belli to do this. And the strategic calculation is quite simple. And to try and make Wilson do this was actually quite difficult, but having to work out that he would calculate, because I thought, hang on, how would I as a historian calculate the benefits and against this? Well, the idea is that Britain is so wrapped up in the European war, they won't be able to do anything. Classic thing. Lots of powers have used that about people. In fact, people use that about Britain. Britain's so wrapped up in a European war, they won't do anything. Britain's so wrapped up in the Cold War, they won't come down to the Falklands. Britain's so wrapped up in fighting in North Africa, in fighting in Europe, they won't do anything in the Far East. All sorts of scenarios. American troops will be treated as liberators by the Canadians. This is actually not hard to actually prove or put forward as an idea, because I was disturbed when I started searching it, the amount of articles which, even if they didn't have those exact words in them, did seem to have some variation of that, even in the run-up to World War One and even the period immediately after World War One, that Canada secretly yearned to be liberated and part of America. I haven't checked more recent papers, but I do wonder if there's still papers to this day which are saying, please, Canada yearns to be part of the United States. Please don't start sending me articles if they do still exist. But they go on for... I have looked as far as the 1920s. 1926 was about when I stopped. And I can still find articles, newspaper articles, which had that idea in there. That Canada secretly wants to be part of America. And if American troops cross the border, Canada would all surrender and join America, open arms, going, you have liberated us from the oppressive British yoke. I'm not sure if anyone who wrote them has actually visited Canada. Yeah. And then post-war America will get the world, Germany will get Europe, and Japan will be but a shadow of their former self, allowing American domination of the Pacific and near Asia. But the think lads were called old in the New World War II and they weren't 20 yet. Yeah, but they're destroyers. Blackwell Maximus, when they start using oil in the US Navy, about this time they're slowly getting into it. That's good. Given the state of the US Army in late 1914, early 1915, I put my money on the Royal Canadian Mounted Police over the US Army. Yeah, I would too. There are issues. There are issues in all this. And US battleships got speed and longer legs in North Carolina, South Dakota than ours. Yeah, they did eventually. One reason. German Patriot groups fund the cruiser or two building USL sunk by the RN before they properly transferred the cruise marine. You could do that, but there again, to actually, because of the experience of the Confederates building ships in foreign yards in the Civil War, the US has amazingly large numbers of laws about building ships in their own national yards for foreign navies. So that's even more difficult. I basically have to erase the American Civil War for that to be possible. Don't know what newspapers. A surprisingly large plethora of them. I haven't checked all their owners. Jack Ray, the Manifest Destiny crowd, pretty much. United America of the entire continent crowd. The ones who believe that America should take over Mexico, all of the Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and Canada, and form into one glorious state. So my America file told us in English class that there is a treaty that as soon as the McQueen dies, Canada joins the US. The America file English teacher. Cute. Well, the Queen's died. Has Canada joined the US yet? If not, I would suggest that that treaty doesn't exist. It's a fun treaty, if it did. Right, a lot of people in the US didn't like that junk about Manifest Destiny. It usually runs over everyone in its path, no matter the country they belong to. Yeah. Nice, Aaron. What actually happens is a global economic depression, probably the greatest depression and global crisis no one prepared for. That's got 1916. US are annexed by Canada, has new provinces of Canada. Look, we cannot be that cruel. The US Army will fight valiantly. The fact that they will probably all be lost in the first invasion of Canada will leave to one side. The Canadians won't probably come south. We'll talk about that in a bit. This is the scenario you have to go for. So basically, Wilson has to have decided that it's a good enough reason that he can do this, that he can, manifest Destiny crowd. He's in hoc to them. And yes, get Canada, and this is the calculation. They can get Canada without a risk of a wider war against Britain. And they can also, without the Royal Navy to worry about, they can focus all their strength in the Pacific to deal with the Japanese. And they can beat down the Japanese, and then they can, they have their strength, and they have... And Britain humbled by Germany in Europe, or at least... severely mauled by Germany in Europe, and therefore America gets the world. Most of the US's best troops at this time are in the Philippines. That is a small issue. Coming out, no chance of US invasion working. What with the rise of the provisions in the US, Canadians would fight to the last rock to defend their beer, whiskey. Having met the very, very Scottish ethnic groups around, the Scottish orientated ethnicities around Halifax, whiskey. If you mount the word prohibition, they will fight to the last. Well, to the last of you to defend their right to have their whiskey. It ain't happening. Nice, frankly, this is delusional. This is the best reasoning and logic I could find for making this scenario work as an alternate history. I never said it was like a likely scenario. Martin, one slight edge, the US versus Canada. This time we aren't running the war with militias that tend to look at army orders versus suggestions. Potentially. Oh. Derp Squad. Yep. Right, I'm getting some iron brew because I've run out of liquid. I have... Before anyone thinks I've just been drinking fizzy drinks all day, I have got through 4 of these. So, I have drunk about 3 litres of water. And this is my first iron brew of the evening. And please note, You might this time around. You would also have the French Canadians would be fighting on the side of the Canadians. Well, they're fighting on the Canadians last time. They didn't want the Americans to take over. So yeah, the French Canadian. You've got the French Canadians who are the French equivalent in the Canadian equivalent in a fight of Florida Man, actually defending Canada. You don't want to know what those people will do to anyone who comes close to Quebec and the Quebecois. I hesitate to think of the sheer psychological atrocities that will be committed upon any American troops that come near them. Most people are fairly certain. Now, we have the Pennsylvania class. The second of the standards. 12 14-inch guns in 4 triple turrets. These are really gorgeous ships. And definitely the match of many ships. Trouble is, at a speed of 21 knots, they're just slow enough versus the Queen Elizabeth class that the Queen Elizabeth class can probably win the fight. Because there's that 3 knot issue. So the Queen Elizabeth class has 3 knots of grace to be able to decide. And the Queen Elizabeth knots can mostly do more than 24 knots. What are you eating? You munching up receipts again? We've been over it. Receipts are not food. But they are good ships. The other trouble for the Americans, and I haven't used ship dispositions in this, or command dispositions in it, because in the nicest way, if you know you're going to start a war, you're probably going to move your ships around. The problem for the Americans is where their ships are. This photo is taken, of course, the Pennsylvania, which wasn't commissioned until June 1916. She wasn't launched till March 1915. So, in the nicest way, there is not much chance she's being commissioned before war is a few months old. Well, this is her taking a picture of her visiting the Philippines. So, expect there to be some American ships in the Philippines. There is no accounting for taste, no. You are a funny fluff, aren't you? So, what would actually happen? And I have got a picture of HMS Tiger here for a reason. So I'm going to read these rough ideas out, and then we're going to discuss them. Depends upon the length of the war exactly what happens, but don't expect Canada to fall easy, probably not at all. In fact, considering how long it took Congress to agree to war with Germany, and their likely view of us on a secret alliance, which would be unconstitutional, but if they go along with it, imagine an invasion of Canada in January 1915, with the British Canadians, everyone knowing they're probably coming. Because that's the soonest they can do it. Unless they decide to wait even longer. And remember, the longer they wait for actually launching their invasion, the more and more prepared the Canadians can get. Because whilst they haven't declared war, so the Canadians won't provoke it, the Canadians can be slowly making sure they have everyone in place. Anyone think attacking Canada in January 1915 is a good idea? Please go and form an orderly queue. Someone has a bridge to sell you. Japan would start a Hoover process on the Philippines Act and expect the British to assist. Mostly the idea of expect the British to assist. The British would do, with mostly the idea of building up a buffer around Australia to stop Japan having a straight run for that. America will probably try and fight back, but a land war on their northern border will take precedence. And that's if Britain and France do not persuade Mexico to head north as well, because whilst the Mexicans were unlikely to believe anything the Germans offered them, the British and the French are a different matter, because remember, the British and French can actually get to Mexico, can actually get supplies to Mexico, and also the British and the French control the British control the communication systems to Mexico, so they don't need to worry about them being intercepted. Rather like the War of 1812, expect strategic raiding may come to the fore. Expect the RN to use their battle cruisers, especially once the Kaiserlich Marine has been contained in the North Sea. It might even be the whole battle cruiser fleet gets moved across. No, they can't win a fight against US's battleships, but they don't need to. They can dance around them for days. And as long as the Royal Navy has their own Queen Elizabeth class in service, and when they have, they're coming into service quite soon, they can probably hold off and be concentrated enough force that they can stop German battle cruisers being a decisive impact on any fleet actions versus the Grand Fleet. Also, that will make, let's be honest, Jellicoe's life a lot easier, because he won't have to deal with Beatty, because Beatty will be sent away to fight the Americans. But there again, Beatty might not be sent away. Beatty might be sent away as part of the force to go with the battlecruiser force, but he might not be senior enough to be given command. That might be given to someone else. This will have an effect on Europe. In fact, it may not only mean Canadian and Australian troops do not come to that theatre, but also the Indian Army troops could well be used to support Australian operations. British troops will no doubt have to be sent out to Canada to reinforce there as well, so far less for the Western Front. British troops not getting involved in probably the same numbers. Western Front might be interesting, as the French will be really hard pressed. But blockade will continue, and I don't think France would collapse as it had in the Franco-Prussian War and would in World War II. I think there would be enough British support for them to reach a stalemate, but it will be very hard. And that, of course, is HMS Tiger, which will no doubt be the flagship of the efforts. Colin Cameron, a large part of the north of New York State and Michigan are populated by families that live on both sides of the border and made up a fair chunk of the Canadian Black Watch. So a good by a large chunk of the U.S. industrial large chunk of the U.S. industrial base. Yeah, there are issues with that particular border area. Those families could well decide they're going to swap sides. Blackman Maximus, invading winter. I'm sure the Americans will issue their troops with winter coats. It's the quickest they could invade them, and let's be honest, if you believe you're going to be greeted as liberators, you might actually think, and that's the only scenario I can see why they would invade Canada, well then think they're liberators, is that why bother, logistics doesn't matter. We're going to be greeted, we can house our troops in their own bases. They'll share accommodations with us. They'll kick out the British troops, will throw the British troops in prison, and the American troops will get the barracks. And look, why weren't Canada's troops in the French trenches? Mainly because the Canadian troops were called over and did reach France, did come to France. But let's be honest, if Britain knows America's going to invade Canada, they're not going to draw the Canadian troops away from Canada, are they? They're going to train them up and leave them in Canada to defend Canada. Because the Canadian government won't let them go. And what's more important for Britain? Saving every scrap of France they can, or saving the whole of Canada? They'll go for the whole of Canada, and they'll sacrifice sections of France. Not too much, but some of it. So America wins because Beatty gets sent away. Honestly, Beatty could actually probably run the war versus America at this time. This is going to sound strange. He could probably do it okay, but he probably isn't senior enough to get sent to be commanding it. And that's another scenario you have to deal with. The fact is, there are other officers who could get sent to command this formation and the war against America, and probably would do. More senior officers to Beatty. Because Beatty's only a vice admiral at this point. So you'd want to send a full admiral. So Beatty's not getting promoted. So it's probably the battlecruiser fleet gets sent. And please note, one of the interesting things is people like to come back to me and debate whether battlecruiser's one or two words. Go and look at the actual name for the battlecruiser fleet. It's battlecruiser, 2 words. If you go and look through all the designations of those forces, it's battlecruiser, 2 words. We combine it, I combine it in 1 word for a designation, but it's 2 words. But also, of course, Beatty does have an American wife, so he could be judged as not quite right for being in British service at this point. He could be judged as having divided loyalties, so that might get rid of him. Scott, RCMP would quite like some holiday properties for when Hushman once. Montana looks quite nice. They formally invite the invasion. Oh. Right, okay. Who on the US side hired Baldrick for planning? Basically, I was actually going through the likely scenario, and I kept coming with going, the trouble is, if you wait even, the longer you wait, the worse the situation gets for the Americans. Because if you use the logic of, okay, let's wait for the summer to invade, that's fine, but you've just given the Canadians that long to build up. And whilst, yes, you are able to build up your forces over that period as well, and rapidly arm up as best you can, if we consider how well the Americans do with their industrial base of 1917 in rapidly arming their forces, that's not going to necessarily help them much with an extra couple of months in 1915. Whereas the Canadians, with the stuff coming across and being able to fight on the defensive, their scenario is going to be very different. There are going to be some very interesting concrete forts probably built in that time. And fortifications, and various defensive positions built up in certain areas. And you might find it very interesting, you might find some very interesting vessels appearing on the Great Lakes. Or rather, appearing in Canada. And I honestly think under this scenario, probably Gallipoli doesn't happen, because in the nicest way, the British have a place to send their pre-dreadnoughts to. They're all popping over there. There is also the other option: we send BT to join the American Navy, but that's just a level of cruelty which is just evil. Also, pre-World War I, the UK Empire gun laws were more liberal than the US, so there is a gun behind every blade of grass in Quebec, and the US may run low on guns. Yeah. Like my Maximus, British used to fighting Europe with only the occasional continental ally, like during Napoleonic Wars. Sacrificing France won't be seen as as too hard a thing. No. It won't be the first time they sacrificed France. Marnus, this has been a hard watch. Yes. How about the Clemson-Wicks flotillas? Well, there's the trouble with the Clemson-Wicks flotillas. If we consider Clemson-class destroyers, they are wonderful destroyers, but they are first laid down in, let's see, their keels are laid in 1918. So their keels are laid in 1918. Some are commissioned in November 1918. Delphi is the first commissioned, and she's wrecked. The Wicks class, which come before them. Let's see. They're laid down in 1917 and launched 1918, or launched, or well, in the case of Wicks, is launched. USS Wicks, aka HMS Montgomery, is launched in 1918 and commissioned in July 1918. So, yeah, they're preceded by the Caldwell class, of which there are only 6 built, and they're preceded by the Sampson class, of which there are 6, preceded by the Tucker class, of which there are 6, O'Brien class, of which there are 6, Alwyn class, of which there are 4, Cassin class, of which there are 4, Paulding class, of which there are 21. Built between 1908 and 1912. That's a nice little ship of 784 tons. Yeah, the U.S. Navy doesn't have that many destroyers. They have good plans for destroyers, they just don't have them yet. They build them later on. The Wicks and the Clemsons get built in huge numbers in 1917, 1918, and they're really good at your shit destroyers. Building a lot of not just, they build a lot of destroyers, but they're not available in 1914. I enjoy old history scenarios, but this one needs to not just need to be a master of mental gymnastics, but mental contortion. Yeah, it is quite difficult to envision a scenario where America is it's going to sound strange, gets into this scenario and then does it all. And one of the problems, okay, yes, you could have him go for war immediately in 1914. Without congressional approval. Okay. So he does an instantaneous evasion. But what does America have available in 1914 to do an instantaneous evasion with? That's a trouble. And what can they do an instantaneous evasion of Canada with? At any point where you do this, it does not work out well. Because America has a lot of potential, and do not get me wrong, they do have a lot of potential. But this entire scenario is a long list of... But they don't have this potential in 1914, 1915. Because they haven't yet put in this bit of infrastructure, or that bit of infrastructure, or this, or that. It's all... They could do this, but they not quite capable of doing it yet. Mission in the 1920s, the Canadian war plan against the US was to attack at once and try and take the whole northern part of the USA. The US slow to move with a tiny army. That the Canadians do have a lot of interesting plans. Please note, this idea the Canadians are nice, pleasant people who are never aggressive at all in war, I don't know where it's come from, but I can tell you it is one of the greatest massacre evokers ever carried out by a nation. And wondering how sacrificing France is actually a sacrifice. Not to the British. It is to the French, but it's not to the British. Jack, right, it is Wilson you're speaking about running this I mean Wilson. Yes. No one else for the Principal at this time would either. No, because let's be honest, the other options is the Roosevelt or Taft. And I had to pick the worst of the 3 options. And actually I looked and went, hang on, Roosevelt, let's be honest, Roosevelt actually is fairly decent at military operations. That man can plan. And goodness gracious me, he would change things around in preparations for his plans. But no, Taft... Well, Taft's an option, but Taft is really... He's going to be really even more conservative. Basically, the entire with his policy, you'd have the Americans staring over the border at the Canadians staring over the border at the Americans, and then both sides going, so when are you going to move? Both of them planning to have dramatic victories based off a counterattack. That would be it. Both would be planning a dramatic victory based off a counterattack, and neither side would ever attack to do anything. Wilson is the one who likes to occasionally invade Mexico to teach the Mexicans about sound financial prospects. His idea of actually teaching a nation to elect the right kind of presidents and leaders is to invade them. Okay, this is the man who wants to found a League of Nations, basically to stop war between civilized countries, but also to provide him with carte blanche to go and invade the uncivilized ones every time they elect politicians he doesn't like. It's easier to put him in a position of actually ordering the invasion of Canada than any of the other options. Suddenly, Canadians are what now? Only if we got a hot cup of cocoa after building a log cabin whilst a fist fighting the beavers for the timber. Roosevelt was the greatest naval proponent. Yes. So in the nicest way, the US Navy would not have been what it was in this war if Roosevelt had been in charge. Which I agree, that's fair. Yeah. Very much, I had... Wilson just keeps looking worse. Wilson is an interesting character. He's not one of the better presidents of the United States. Not one of the better presidents. You know, there are historians who... there are two groups of historians. There are those who learn from history and want to tell it. And those who learn from history and believe they can change it. I think Wilson falls in the latter category. I have this sneaking suspicion. And, of course, I did add in the scenario here of Mexico. So that's the other thing. America will be fighting a two-front war. They'll be trying to invade Canada and dealing with an invasion of Mexico, and most of their troops, their best troops, will be caught in the Philippines by the Japanese. It's just not a good scenario for them. Because they did think about suggesting, well, perhaps they'll do a quick descent on things like Bermuda. And I was going, with what? What are they going to quickly descend on Bermuda? The garrison from New York? Possibly. Okay. But Bermuda is not a good place to try and land on and invade. It's got enough of a naval presence and enough of a base that you're going to need fairly hefty support to do it. And the trouble is, once you've got Bermuda, you've just used all those troops and all those resources to take Bermuda, and all we've got is Bermuda. Doesn't really help. It's like their other plan for a rapid descent upon Halifax, that very important naval base for the Royal Navy in Canada. It's true, it's an important naval base. But as such, it's got a fairly big fortifications all around it, and fairly well fortified. So, likelihood is they're going to lose a lot of personnel net. And again, remember, they are going to have to give the British months of warning. Months of warning. I mean, again, we go back to, it's going to be so much warning that, in the nicest way, the papers are going to be predicting it. Let alone the intelligence. And look, this is 1914. The Zimmerman telegram is later in the war. And also, in the nicest way, the Zimmerman telegram happens because the British intercept German communications to Mexico. British and French communications from Mexico would not be intercepted. British and French promises. And again, that's the point. This war, the Americans would be having to enter the war against not just the British, but also the French. They'd be going to war against both. And probably Italy as well. Make of that what you will. Tire pressure gauges often grow legs, Stafford. In my experience, they disappear quite regularly. It's going to do it. And air power is not a thing at this time. Nope. That's still in development. Philippines would probably celebrate Japanese invasion and join in the fight. Potentially. Potentially they will find factions who will support them. Who will support the Japanese invasion. So I bet the British were reading French diplomatic cables about Mexico. Of course they were. This is such a terrible scenario, and I will say this repeatedly in the Long Patrol. In fact, I'm honestly tempted to replace the Long Patrol with not record Long Patrol and just do the Battle of Jutland thing, because it is the Battle of Jutland fleet formation for the Saturday video, and the reason I say that is partially because of the amount of work I've got going on, but partially because most of the video in a Long Patrol, and in a recorded video, is going to be me going, yeah. And then it gets worse for the Americans, and I know there are going to be people coming on here who are going to be coming and going, the Americans would have done this. No, there's no magic hand waving that gets them out of the situation their governments have got them into. I know how good America is. This is no dissing of the American people or anything like that. No disrespect to the American people. Nothing like that. But your governments, by 1914-15, your country's in no state at all for a war with anyone, under any circumstances, let alone anyone of the size of the British Empire at that point. And remember, this is before Britain's been suckered into the whole horror of the trenches for the rest of World War I. No, this is the beginning period. Okay? When Britain still has all its strength and can focus it where it likes. So the British don't need and might not put all those troops, and probably wouldn't put all those personnel into the horror of World War I, into the trenches. They'd be putting more personnel into other places. It's just, it's not a good scenario for anyone. Because it would be, as especially on the categories, it is the Long Patrol of America loses its mind. If the US enters the war in January, Italy might not enter in May, or even enter later on the Axis side. Potentially, but actually, let's be honest. If you're Italy, think about it from this perspective. You get licensed to beat up Austro-Hungary, and you don't want to ally with them. And you also get whatever the British and French are promising you. And maybe you get some of the American territories around the world. Because the America's got protectorates. They've taken off the Spanish. You could get your own islands in the sun. Do you want some islands in the Pacific, Italy? Well, you join the war. You can have the American ones. I know I'm doing my happy dog face, but that's literally one of the things I can see the British offering them. And again, the fact is, it's not as if the American fleet can force their way through to Italy and help open up trade routes. They haven't got a fleet to do it. Yes, the Italian fleet can beat up the French fleet, but the Italian fleet don't want the British fleet turning up. And yes, the British fleet can't be everywhere and dealing with the Germans, but the Italians... There's also that scenario. The British, remember, cancel the eighth R class. They turned 3 R class battleships into 2 R class battle cruisers. But you notice I haven't mentioned a round and repulse in this scenario, because if America enters the war as well, I can see Britain rushing through capital ship production. Why? So they can deploy some vessels to support out there. Because they probably want 4 of their R class to support the Grand Fleet and the Queen Elizabeths. But they probably want a Queen Elizabeth, probably HMS Queen Elizabeth herself, and 4 R class to go with the battle cruisers to go and beat up the Americans on the east coast of America, while the Japanese are doing similar on the west coast. And that's, you know, when the Italians and the Americans in deciding World War One, the Americans joined the Italians in World War One. The Italians had already joined the Entente earlier in World War One. The Italians got into World War One earlier than the Americans did by a few years. Alternate history can be useful in terms of learning, and sometimes it's for learning what won't work. Basically, this is learning that America has no choice really about which side they join in World War One. They don't. You sit there and go, you can stay neutral, or you can join the Entente. You can't really do both, unless you're prepared to invest in a lot of defense and construction. Because you don't have control of the sea. Which, by the way, is what President Roosevelt has been preaching to America for about 20 years by this point. And Mahan had been preaching to America for about 20 years at this point. Doesn't France still have Vietnam at this point? Yeah. So France could also be getting involved in the invasion of the Philippines. Right. Alternate history can be useful term learning. Sometimes it's for learning what won't work. Yeah, well, yeah, I said this won't work for America. Mark, I understand American. The fact is the US has shoved its hand, not head, but hand, in the meat grinder in this scenario. Yep. I'd say they've stuffed something else in there as well, but I'm a polite person. I don't tend to swear or use rude words, but you can all imagine what I'm suggesting. Alright, it would be like spending more than a year to push into one city to claim it. Internal fights going on the whole time. Morale would drop and, yeah. I think, yeah, the USA would be humiliated, and what effect does this have on the USA? Honestly, it would be interesting. I don't think there would be an invasion, but I think... Let's put it this way. You could have a very real possibility under this scenario that you end up having a peace treaty. Probably the Americans agreed much earlier than the war with Germany. Because you'd probably have the other side come to power in America quite quickly. 1916 is when the election's due, so they basically, that to me would be the probable loss of end of the war, because I think the other side would get elected and end the war. And because it would be seen as Wilson's war, and not Charlie Wilson's war, Woodrow Wilson's war. And I wouldn't be surprised if at that point there was some agreement made whereby America might actually not be allowed to have... They might be limited by treaty to parity with Japan or something in terms of their fleet size. The British that might meet the standard. You can never exceed Japan in treaty in your fleet size, or something like that could be set as a standard. I have no idea what it would be. It wouldn't be the same a naval destroying treaty as Germany gets, because the US needs a navy, and the British would understand that would cause a lot of problems for the US. But at the same point, they wouldn't be allowed to have untrammeled construction. So the British would come with some form of a naval arms limitation treaty. And probably they would also expand Canada a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if nicest way, if, let's put it this way, if maybe some of the parts of the borders which have agreements, which were thanks to Germany, etc., got handed over to the Americans, got handed over to Canada. Britain might even they might even add Alaska onto Canada. They might. I doubt they would, but they might. Sure, maybe Chile would invade us too. Honestly, considering the amount of friendships the British have in South America, the Mexican army coming up from the south could be incredibly well supported. What happens if Eugene Debs wins the election in 1916? I'm not really sure, because Eugene is even more of an unknown. And I didn't even bother with the fourth candidate, really. Black Maxwell, my suggestion for patron, Ark Royal in late 1941 near Hawaii, going for a reef at Eskimo, makes more sense than this. Remember that in that scenario, Ark Royal forms up with HMS Warspite as a fast carrier battle group in the Pacific. I'm just saying, in which case Warspite it could be at the battles of Midway and Coral Sea. Just think of that one, HMS Warspite at Midway and Coral Sea. Black Maxwell's that is scenario that goes through if you start doing that one. My gosh, UK diplomats will not make to take US mainland territory, cause resentment. Look at the fallout of German annexation and pressure. Unnecessary humiliation equals another war. True, and nicest way, when I'm talking about the border issues, there is a thing like there's an island divided in two, and there's a part of America where you have this little lip which is American territory, but to get to the rest of America they have to go through Canadian territory, and it's a sort of little isthmus which is just below the line. I think things like that could end up being named up to just go, right, we're just making them British territory. They're in Canadian territory, I mean. Cameron, the 1812 Treaty Concession Borders being enforced? There's some interesting issues. So would you elaborate on the circumstances would be if US stay neutral for all of World War One? If the US stay neutral for all of World War One, honestly, the 14 points don't come into being, and the naval treaties do not come into being. America does not have the standing it needs in the world to try and push through naval treaties or anything of that. I think the Treaty of Versailles, because Britain doesn't have America backing up, is probably going to be even harsher on Germany. Because instead of Britain being able to play France against America for the Treaty of Versailles, the French will be going all out, and it'll be a fight between the French and the British over how harsh the Treaty of Versailles goes. But that'll probably weaken Germany even more. That might even break Germany up. because that was to an extent what the French were pushing for, which could have an interesting effect on World War II if it happens. As said, I don't think the naval treaties happen. The Britain will probably demobilise after war, but if America's continuing to build up, and if Wilson's next order of ships goes through, etc., and the Congress is actually paying for those ships, expect to see the G3s and the N3s built. And expect to see basically the tech race between Britain and America carry on as it has been as part of the naval race. Unless America ducks out of it financially, in which case the British will be the only ones building battleships in town for a few years. Because the British will just be slowly replacing their old ones with newer ones, keeping the industry going and ticking over as they do most of the time in peacetime. To say, would just the entire US military just do an entire coup against the government sort of war, what if war? I don't think so, because the US military tends to be fairly loyal and not too coup-ish in their intent, kind of like the British military. But I wouldn't be surprised if, let's put it this way, as said, I think this war, if it happened under this scenario, I think it gets through based on Wilson's agreements, etc. I'm not sure if it's a full treaty or a secret agreement with the Germans, some kind of thing. He tries to honour and he pushes it through, but I don't think it survives 1916. So I think the war ends in 1916 no matter what. Bern will be a battleship, not a carrier. If there's no treaty. Language. Entente woos Spain to join the war by offering to return Cuba to Spain? Potentially. You could end up with Spain fighting on the side to get back for revenge over the Spanish-American War. You could have Spain join it, yeah. There are all sorts of fun things which could happen. And look, without America joining the war, does France manage to hold on? Their army was in mutiny by a little more. Let's put it this way. The army was refusing to advance. They weren't refusing to defend. You have to remember, there is a difference. Just because the French army calling it mutiny, there is often this subject where people go, well, they're refusing to fight. No, they're refusing orders to advance. So that does not mean the same thing as refusing to defend. So that doesn't mean they're going to lose. That means they just won't keep advancing. And remember, there's a ticking clock of the actual blockade on Germany and the destruction of Germany's trade and imports and their economy. And that's constantly going down. As long as the blockade's in place, and as long as Germany can't trade with the rest of the world, and let's be honest, trading with Russia, yeah, we won against them, but we ran against them because they destroyed themselves. If the Treaty of Versailles is harsh and breaks up Germany, World War II could well be an Anglo-Prussian war against France. I don't think World War II would be that, but you have to remember Japan would come out of this war far larger, with no America as a check on their power in the Pacific. Admittedly, then they have no threat of America in their power in the Pacific, and the Anglo-Japanese alliance becomes the dominant alliance of the world. Think about that. The two most powerful nations in the world will be Britain and Japan at the end of this war. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw imperial visits to each other. Because that'd be one way to firm up the alliance. A senior member of the British royal family goes and visits Japan. A senior member of Japan's royal family, probably a more senior one to show even more status and favour, goes to visit Britain, and so on until eventually you have the King of Britain visiting Japan and the Emperor of Japan visiting Britain, which is, of course, very, very unusual and completely unheard of, but would be a very good way to cement the alliance. On my off-topic question, did France have any designs after Lyon to rival the G3 entries? Nope. Basically, they were trying to complete the Lyons, which, let's be honest, would probably have been finished after the N3s had come into service, which would probably mean they would come into service in a world where they frankly didn't matter in anyone's calculations. I'm sorry, weren't the Dominions against the Anglo-Japanese alliance? Nope. The Dominions were quite happy with the Anglo-Japanese alliance because it meant the Japanese weren't a threat to them. Because the Dominions knew that if Japan attacked them, then the British would come to support them. But they also knew that if the that Japan was technically Britain's ally, and as the most important, as the valued and only major ally other than Portugal, a long-term ally, it was important that they were going to sort of. Japan was unlikely to attack them. Batman Maximus. Royal marriages between UK and Japan, possible in aftermath scenario. It depends how the alliance and relationships develop. But it's not an impossible outcome, because they would be another royal family, and it would be a way of further tying in the alliance, because let's be honest, if the Prince of Wales married a Japanese princess, and despite her children would therefore not be able to inherit the throne in Japan, it would become a very big thing for fighting a war against Britain. And it would be similar, go back again, if one of the senior princesses married the heir to the Japanese throne, and coming from such a old and prestigious royal family, I could see that being sold in Japan. It would be an issue, but it might be being sold. Depend on the timing and how things developed, but it's a possibility. And Brest-Litovsk Treaty allowed Germany to surge troops to the Western Front. Their offensives were close-run battles that likely were turned by American cannon fodder being fed in agreement. That's often... How do I put this? The American cannon fodder being fed into the meat grinder thing for the Brest-Litovsk troops is often overstated. Yes, it stops them where they are, but German logistics are weak enough they can't go much further. So, whilst, yes, they might have got further into France before they'd been stopped, their logistics would still have run out. The thing is, the American troops coming in uses up the German logistics more quickly. So that doesn't mean the Germans would have actually got much further, it's just they ran out the logistics more quickly, facing off against the Americans. And also, let's think this through. This would be over. This war will probably be over by 1916, which means the Canadian troops who've been fighting in Canada against the Americans, the British troops have been in Canada fighting Americans, the Australian troops and the fighting in there, maybe even Japanese troops under this circumstance, Indian troops, etc., who've all been fighting elsewhere, can surge to the Western Front. At which point, yes, you have this. This is the scenario going on. So you're going to get reinforcements coming into both sides. I've seen information they wanted a gun. There are politicians who talk all sorts of things, but in the nicest way, most of those politicians, when you see them talking, are talking in the context of the 1920s, when they see it as a problem with American diplomacy and America. But if America is now out of the way, as they would be in this point, why would the British get rid of it? Sorry, fly. So, nicest way, also, this is going to sound terrible for the Dominions, but the Dominions can want things gone all they like. In the end, it's going to be the British government which is going to make the decision about the Anglo-Japanese alliance. And they're going to have to live with it. And they do, because their security is guaranteed. And on this scenario, they'd be even more guaranteed by British security, because their strongest defence against Japanese interference is the fact they are part of the British Empire, and are therefore owned by the great ally of Japan, Great Britain. Vision, what if Australia joins America, the AA alliance? Australia has even less prepared for war in 1914 than America is. Yes, they have HMAS Australia, but in nicest way, there is a reason the Australia to join the alliance of America against Britain. You'd have to remember that quite a large chunk of their navy is British. So they would have interesting conversations. Their forces are even some of them are even just some of them are not even first generation Australian. They are just British. Okay, on their naval forces, which means they could well find themselves facing not having a navy and fighting Britain. That's not a good scenario. Japan with Philippines and the British alliance means they have a secure internal source of oil, so they would concentrate on China. Okay, in the nicest way, Night 6 everyone, you are now have got far, far beyond the concept, the criteria of this video and this topic, and you've introduced all sorts of things. A British Empire turned Imperial Federation or Commonwealth signed a new Anglo-Japanese alliance after World War II. Is this World War II under this scenario, or World War II under the traditional scenario? In which case, why are they signing an alliance with Japan when Japan's just been beaten up? And how would the USA react, and how would the Australians and Kiwis react, etc.? You're jumping in all sorts of things. If the Australians and Kiwis were part of the Imperial Federation, Commonwealth, and part of the constitution process, then if the Commonwealth decides to sign an Anglo-Japanese alliance, then they would be part of the decision-making process in some form of Imperial Federation or Grand Commonwealth. That's a very different scenario from the Dominion status in the Empire. So you have, you're entering far too many variables. And look, interesting theory on Japan, UK, but it seems to fly in the face of the reality of Queen Victoria's grandchildren all warring against each other. To be fair, the grandchildren weren't all warring against each other. There was one grandchild picking fights with all the others. And that was the Kaiser, who was, let's be honest, the disappointing grandchild of the set. He was the disappointing grandchild of the set. The son of her favourite daughter, and the greatest hope she had, and the trouble is, his father died, and Bismarck had filled William with too many ideas of his greatness to try and counterbalance the father, and created a monster of his own undoing. Ask on brew ships and give more information. Yes, it's okay, everyone. Vision, does Hood get built? Probably. Might be different in this scenario. Remember, in this scenario, the British have probably come up close and personal fighting someone with triple turrets. They might have developed a passion for triple turrets by the time they get to designing and building Hood. Wouldn't there be some problems with fatigue and exhaustion in shipping all those Dominion British troops from North America to the front to Europe? Not particularly. They'd be given the voyage over, rested up when they get here, and then sent into. They wouldn't be rested up and sent into battle straight away. It'd be a process of deployment across. So they'd be gathered up, armed up, brought over to Europe, probably given new equipment, trained, ready, cycled up, and then cycled into the front line. So it would take months for their deployment, but yeah, they'd do it. They wouldn't just go, snap, you're gone now. You've just been fighting in North America. Now 2 days later, you're fighting in North Europe. No. I know, Johnny would have been better off the second son to become Kaiser. Yes, he was smart. He was a very good admiral and knew what he was talking about, and was actually a sensible human being. Basically, yeah, the Kaiser is the wrong son becomes Kaiser. Calm the government. A World War I that goes into 1919 means the planned British army attack against the exhausted Germans goes ahead, which means you have mass tank and armoured car assaults into the Ruhr. Yeah, which probably devastates German industry for a good generation or so. Vision. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was Assistant Secretary of the Navy this time. Yes, and he wasn't exactly the biggest fan of Wilson, so honestly, I could see him being part of the group that leads the campaign to end the war in 1916. My God, could Mexico and other Central South American countries to join the war against the US be expected to join the war in Europe after the US was knocked out? Probably not. They wouldn't be expected to, but they might decide to join out. But I expect to be token forces, so they probably send a brigade or something like that. Hello. Are you being disattentive for a reason? I'm not sure. I've got a poodle being very, very attentive. I'm not sure why. Ooh. Building fleets for Jutland is at 70%. Let's see. The USA fights World War I on the side of Germany is on 30%. Has everyone voted yet? Because we've got 30 votes so far. I will let it go on for another about 5 minutes before I end the poll. So you've got about 5 minutes. Measuring, I think the war ends before Kansas. I don't think at any point does the war actually enter American territory in terms of the British invasion, the British from the north. I think the most you have to deal with is possibly the Mexicans coming up from the south, and that's going to be an issue for America to deal with. Basically, the whole scenario is just not a sensible thing. It is, and then it got worse. Please note, anyone who comes and comments on this is probably going to go, well, this wouldn't happen. And I agree with you, it wouldn't happen, because as we've been through it all, it is not a good scenario. There is no scenario in it which is good. Oh. But if anyone who really wants to wonder if this is actually a viable scenario for it happening. There is someone who is apparently a member of the Lowly Institute in America, non-resident fellow, Lowy Institute, that apparently looks at things, and he's just went, so when the British First Sea Lord has said, UK must invest to beat Russia's stealth submarines, warned UK Navy Chief, and he has just tweeted, well, begs the question to whether the SSN AUKUS will be optimized for Russian or Chinese adversaries. Well, seeing as Russians usually have better stealth techniques, if you can take down them, you can probably take down the Chinese. Are you trying to get up in my lap? Have you decided you want lap time? Oh, you have decided you want lap time. Okay, alright. Oi. Oi vey. Oi vey. Oi vey. Oi. Oh. 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 Oi. Oh. Oi. Caramba. Help. Help. I'm being squashed by a poodle. Yeah. Good God, that was not good. Oi. Hey. You see, that's the thing. Oh. Watch out for your jewels. They got trampled. Hello. Hello. You cute. You cute. Oh. Yeah, you're cute. Hello, Daniel. He is a lapdog. Yes, he is a lapdog. He firmly believes he is a lapdog. Oh. Let me just put my leg there, and then you can't kick the thing. Ah. Yeah. Let's put it this way. Richard, what ships would Germany of USA build for World War One? I can't help with poodle attacks, Doctor. Sorry, don't worry. What ships would Germany have the USA build for them? Probably cruisers, if they could get anything, but that's about it. Yeah, he is currently sitting in my lap going, hello, world, hello. Yes, it is always time for snacks and plays. Right then, 1 minute left on the poll. 34 votes cast. Currently 65% for building fleets for Jutland. And USA fights on World War One on side of Germany. Oi! As the long patrol for Saturday. And if I get time, let's put it this way: the USA fights World War One on side of Germany. I will still do the long patrol for, but it will come out as a Sunday morning sort of one random run rather than as a sort of hello, you good? You happy? Okay, good. Rather than as the Saturday video. Oh, the Formula 1 this week was cancelled in Italy due to flooding. Yeah. We licking my hand for a reason. Do you want the salt from my hand or something else? I don't think my hand's been anywhere nice. This is really a poodle appreciation live stream. He just lets you talk history to keep you happy. Yes, I know. I know. We have got a dedicated poodle cam, but I don't have it running at the moment because I have hard drives connected in. But I have always got the option during brew ships of turning on the dedicated poodle cam. Right, ending poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Poll ended. 34 votes cast, and Saturday's video is going to be building fleets for Jutland. Well, that means I'll record this one, but it'll be a lot shorter. At some point. If there's a poodle pan, is there a corgi cam too? It's technically the doggy cam, because technically it's positioned on where the doggies sit, when they're actually sitting on the ground. When they're sitting on my lap, it doesn't cover them, because then it'll be focused up my crotch the whole time, and that seems a bit rude. Thompson, I think it's more of a fluffy research assistant bed cam. Yes. I also have a furry housemate that jumps on me doing for his time for dinner. Mine purrs instead of barks. Fun times. So, I'm going to finish there. I'm going to appear on Clarke chat in a bit, after I have sorted out this one and probably put him away to bed properly, because otherwise he's going to stay awake in the office. And I'm also going to... Let's see, what else am I going to... Yeah, tomorrow night, of course, is Friday, so it's UAD evening. And I will say now, I will be tomorrow night asking if people would prefer me to continue with the Rome Total War Remastered on Sunday, or if they want me to continue with the Battlefleet Gothic Armada campaign. Although, with the Battlefleet Gothic Armada campaign, I'm not sure why, but I seem to be not generating any money at all. So I'm basically generating fleets out of thin air at this precise time. I don't know how, but I have no money. And that is the one thing the Imperium of Man does actually have in the actual Warhammer 40k, is resources. What's he up to now? Stream tomorrow on Twitch. Yes, the stream tomorrow on Twitch will be UAD. My coach, last Rome Total War, the video, there was no battle sound. Could hear you talking okay, but no game sounds. I will have a look into that, because I did something to turn off the annoying Carthaginian generals who keep talking about having camp followers to service their men's needs, and it just bugs the life out of me every single time. Blackburn Maximus. UAD needs to add quad turrets to the cruisers so I can make mini Riculou cruisers. Yes, they do. Thank you, Jens Morrison. Anyway, so thank you very much, everyone. Good night. And I will see you if you want to join us on the Clarke chat. I'll be there in a bit after I have taken someone into his beddies. Oh no, deficit spending, just like modern democracies. Yeah, maybe. Thank you, Bichon. Thank you, Jens Morrison. Thank you, Michael Cooch. Thank you, Knight Security 1. Thank you, Seneca Nero. Those parts are attached. Okay? Those parts are attached. Punch. DG40, thank you. Thank you, Donrick Ironhammer. Thank you, Just Funk. Thank you, John Shea. The Fluffy Research Assistant says good night as well. And I would really like to get his foot away from parts of me. No, don't do it again. Minotaurus, did they change the speeches between Rome Total War and Remastered? They seem to have got... They seem to have reduced their scope and range. They used to be far better, I swear. Can I say goodbye to everyone? Oh, you are. While coughing. Better. Okay. Yeah. Ugh. Another emoji on its way. Hopefully. Hopefully, if I got to 90, there'll be another emoji on its way. Alright. Now, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Longbow. Thank you, Anuk. Thank you, Alzaski, Kalmasberg. Please don't jump down. I really don't need that pain again this evening. Oi! Just got the hands there in time. Thank you, Dark Squad, by my Blackman Maximus. Thank you, Shane Stoney. Thank you, Dunrick Hammer, History Vanguard. Thank you, everyone. Take care. You are cruel. I love you, but you do that on purpose. No, Drac had his Wednesday video dragged into copyright claimed. Ugh, fun times. Next time wear a box. Thank you. You did, I made sure of that. Thank you, Jack Ray. Well then, in which case there will be a new emoji coming out. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and probably it will be the gas mask. I'll try and get a suitable picture. Yes, you're cute. You think it should be a picture of you with a gas mask on? Well, if I had the actual graphical skills, that's what I would design. But I don't have those graphical skills to put your face with a gas mask on. But I will try and figure out a suitable gas mask. How's that sound? That sounds okay? You're looking at me very upset. We'll work it out. Take care, Stafford. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, all my admins this evening. It's been really nice having you. And Sean. I think all of you have been on at various points. And Seneca was here as well. Thank you, everyone. And, yeah. Athletic support. You know what? I did used to play cricket at school. I do have one of those knocking around somewhere. They managed to make me play cricket for 1 year. After that, I basically said, it's rugby for me. I don't suit any other sport. I really don't. I do not have the temperament for cricket. I don't. I'm sorry. If standing around in the middle of the sun, staring, waiting for a ball to come in your direction. I like watching baseball. I'm not a fan of cricket. I'm sorry. I know I'm English. I'm supposed to be a fan of cricket. I'm not. I'm just not. Take care, Aaron. Thank you. And, so does Drac have one you could use for a picture emoji? I'm not sure. Take care. Toodles.